What becomes of a man who dares to raise his throne above the sky that birthed him? What dream drives mortal hands to build towers that scrape the breath of angels? And what silence follows when heaven turns its face away? Beneath the dim and endless sky, there once walked a man whose footsteps echoed like thunder upon the earth, Nimrod, the first to crown himself as more than flesh. He was not born into rebellion. He grew into it slowly, like fire rising through dry reeds. They said the stars bowed when he was born, that his mother saw a flame leap from his cradle and stretch toward the sun. He was not content with dust or blood. He longed for dominion over both. And so his name became a curse whispered through trembling lips: Nimrod ibn Canaan, the hunter of men, the builder of Babel, the one who defied the decree of the Most High. The winds of Babylon still carry his scent: oil, iron, incense, and pride. The ruins still remember the tremor of his laughter as the stones of his empire reached for heaven's gate. But all towers fall when they reach too close to light. And so, tonight, beneath the hush of the stars, we unroll the forgotten scrolls of a kingdom swallowed by sand, of angels who wept unseen, of a man who sought to unmake the divine order itself. If you're still here, perhaps this story was meant for you. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and if your heart feels called, press like and subscribe so the next untold chapter finds you. In the dawn before dawn, when the heavens were still whispering to the earth, a single cry broke the hush of creation. It came from a tent deep within the plains of Shinar, where the night burned low and the stars bowed their heads. There, a child was born beneath an omen that split the sky in gold and crimson. The elders said it was the birth of a flame, a soul unlike any other, destined to rule not by right but by defiance. His name was Nimrod, son of Cush, grandson of Ham, born from the line that survived the flood. But though he came from Noah's blood, his heart burned with a different fire, one that did not remember mercy. They say the wind itself paused when he drew his first breath. His mother felt the heat radiating from him, as though he carried within his chest the echo of the sun. And when she looked into his eyes, she saw no infant gaze, only reflection, like the calm surface of a deep, unending fire. From that night forward, whispers spread through the tribe. Shepherds spoke of strange lights flickering above his tent at dusk. The old woman who ground the barley by moonlight heard his name in the rustle of palm leaves, in the cry of the desert fox. The child of the flame, they said, the one who will command the winds. As he grew, the world bent toward him in quiet awe. The rivers seemed to still when he passed. The birds circled in restless patterns above his head. His laughter was deep, not the sound of a boy, but of something older, as though the mountains themselves had learned to echo joy. But beneath that laughter lived silence, a silence filled with knowing. By the time Nimrod could stand, he would wander beyond the tents, out to where the dunes kissed the edge of the horizon. He would stand there for hours, eyes fixed on the stars. When his father found him and asked what he sought, the boy whispered, "The throne that no man can see." Cush laughed, but uneasily. "That throne belongs to the one who made us." And Nimrod, still gazing upward, replied softly, "Then why does he not sit among us?" That question lingered in the air long after the boy had gone to sleep, a seed of rebellion wrapped in innocence. Years passed. The tribe prospered, the herds grew, and the floodwaters that once drowned the world became only a story. But Nimrod's hunger did not fade. He studied the winds, the stars, the movement of beasts, and the breath of men. He was a hunter not of flesh alone, but of power. When he cast his spear, it flew as though guided by unseen hands. When he spoke, even the elders listened. And then came the vision. It was said that one night, as he slept beneath an open sky, he saw the heavens blaze with fire. A ladder of light rose from the earth to the throne of the unseen. Angels moved like rivers of flame upon it, singing words that burned through his dream. But when Nimrod reached to climb, the ladder shattered, and he fell not upon earth, but into a field of stars that turned to ash beneath his touch. He awoke with his heart pounding, the taste of smoke upon his tongue. From that night, the boy who once gazed at the heavens began to turn his gaze toward the earth, toward kingdoms, toward walls, toward dominion. His mother found him carving shapes into the dust, drawing towers that reached to the sky. "What are you building, my son?" she asked, and he answered without looking up, "A place where the divine will no longer look down on man." The wind shifted then, cold, heavy, carrying wit. At the scent of something ancient. Some said it was a prophecy, others said it was madness. But to Nimrod it was destiny. By his 13th year he could silence men twice his age. By his 17th, tribes followed his command as though moved by divine decree. His words were honey and iron, sweet to hear, impossible to resist. He spoke of unity, of strength, of a kingdom that would never fall. He called it Babel, though its foundations had not yet been laid. And yet behind every promise of glory, there flickered a shadow, a voice that whispered in his heart when the campfires dimmed. "The heavens are yours to conquer if only you dare." So he dared. He began to forge weapons no one had seen before, iron that sang when struck, blades that caught the sunlight like flame. He hunted lions with his bare hands and hung their skins upon his throne. The people began to call him Al-Jabbar, the mighty one, the warrior king. But the wise men of the east spoke quietly among themselves. "He is not mighty by the mercy of God, but by his silence." And in the silence, Nimrod's heart hardened. He no longer prayed. He no longer sought the stars for meaning. He began to believe that he himself was chosen not to serve heaven but to rival it. And thus began the birth of empire, an empire not of stone and gold, but of will. For before any kingdom is built upon the earth, it is first built within the heart of a man who refuses to kneel. The dust remembered his footsteps, the fire remembered his name, and heaven began to whisper his warning. Night fell soft upon Shinar, and with it came a silence too deep for rest. The fires of Nimrod's encampment burned high against the black horizon, their smoke rising like prayers swallowed by the wind. Around him, thousands gathered, shepherds, hunters, masons, dreamers, each drawn to his voice as though it carried the promise of a forgotten paradise. He spoke of greatness, but his eyes held something else, a longing far older than ambition. It was the ache of a spirit unsatisfied with earth's low ceiling. "The heavens," he would say, his words rolling slowly through the desert air, "are not closed. They are merely waiting for the brave." And men, weary from generations of wandering and fear, believed him. They had lived under the weight of the flood's memory, a time when heaven's wrath had drowned the world and left them trembling before unseen power. But Nimrod spoke of defiance, of standing tall where their fathers had knelt. He called it faith of a new kind, faith in man, in his own rising flame. Brick by brick, his kingdom began not yet of stone, but of spirit. He bound tribes that had long despised one another, weaving their rivalries into one vast will. "No more divisions," he said. "No more gods above us. We will be as one tongue, one people, one hand that builds eternity." The people cheered. They did not yet see the snare hidden in the unity of his dream. At dawn, Nimrod would walk alone to the river's edge. There he would watch the sun crawl from the water as if reborn. The reflection shimmered like molten gold, and in it he saw his own face haloed by light, godlike in its quiet command. Sometimes he whispered to that image, "You are more than mortal." And though no one answered, the silence seemed to agree. It was there that the voice returned, faint as wind moving through reeds, yet heavy with something otherworldly. "Build," it said. He turned sharply, searching the emptiness. "Build, and you will be remembered beyond the stars." Nimrod's breath trembled. Was it the whisper of the divine or the echo of his own pride? He did not ask. The command was enough. That night he gathered his architects, men whose hands could shape earth into beauty, whose eyes could see the measure of the unseen. They brought forth clay, straw, and the secrets of binding. He drew in the dust a great circle, wider than any camp, higher than any temple. "This will be the foundation," he said, "a tower that reaches the throne of heaven, not to bow but to stand beside it." The elders protested. "O Nimrod, no mortal can touch the dwelling of the Most High." He smiled softly as one speaks to children. "Then let him descend and stop me." Those words burned through the night like a curse. Some say even the stars shuddered. Days turned to weeks, and the sound of labor filled the plains, hammers, chants, the rhythm of 1,000 souls building what no prophet dared imagine. Women wove banners that caught the sun. Men sang songs that trembled the air with pride. Nimrod stood above them all, his robes of scarlet flowing like fire, his crown gleaming with the dust of conquest. But power, once tasted, is a hunger that never sleeps. He began to call himself not just king, but lord of the four corners. Messengers were sent to distant lands, proclaiming his dominion over all who walked beneath the sky. Even the priests of Babel began to rewrite their hymns, not to God, but to En. Nimrod, the mighty hunter who pierced the heavens. And yet, alone in the stillness of night, he felt something move within him, not triumph, but unease. He dreamed again of the ladder of light, shattered before his climb. But this time he did not fall. This time he stood upon the ruins and raised a tower from their ashes. He woke drenched in sweat, his chest heavy as stone. From his tent he could see the half-built ziggurat rising against the dawn, its shadow stretching across the desert like the arm of a sleeping giant. "Soon," he whispered, "soon it will touch the sky." The people adored him, but the wise grew afraid. They saw in his eyes the same fire that once consumed the world before the flood. They spoke in secret that Nimrod's heart had become a tower unto itself, each thought a brick of pride, each breathing a step away from mercy. And still he built. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, a wanderer came to Babel, a man clothed in simple linen, his eyes deep with knowing. He watched the workers, the endless rise of brick upon brick, and said quietly to Nimrod, "You seek the heavens through clay, but the heavens are not reached by hands of dust." Nimrod regarded him coldly. "And who are you to speak of heavens?" The stranger smiled, almost sadly. "One who remembers them." They say Nimrod's heart trembled, if only for a moment. Then pride returned, heavier than ever. "Then remember this," he said. "Soon heaven will remember me." The stranger bowed, placed his palm upon the ground, and whispered a prayer so soft even the wind could barely carry it. Then he vanished into the dunes, leaving behind no trace but the faint scent of myrrh and rain. That night a storm rose. Lightning struck near the tower's peak, and for a heartbeat the entire plain was bathed in white fire. The workers froze, waiting for Nimrod's command. He raised his arms to the sky and shouted, "See, even the thunder obeys me." The crowd roared, but above the roar the storm did not fade. The thunder lingered not in anger but in warning. And in the silence that followed, a single drop of rain fell upon Nimrod's crown. He looked up. The heavens were dark, and somewhere hidden beyond the clouds the watchers stirred. The storm did not leave. It hovered like a wound above Shinar, a trembling sky heavy with unspoken judgment. Days passed, and yet the wind refused to rest. The workers whispered of omens, of strange lights at night, of shadows moving upon the half-built tower though no man climbed it. But Nimrod did not tremble. To him, the thunder was applause, the lightning his coronation. The higher the tower rose, the more his pride swelled, until his very gaze seemed to command the elements. He believed heaven was watching, and that it was afraid. Each morning he stood upon the rising tiers of Babel, the world sprawling beneath his feet like a conquered dream. He felt the pulse of creation within his veins. "This," he whispered, "is how gods must see." The tower rose higher than any mountain, its stones baked by the fires of Shinar's plain until they glowed like amber in the sun. Workers sang as they climbed, voices echoing across the sky. "Glory to Nimrod, builder of eternity." They cried, their chants spiraling upward into the trembling clouds. But the heavens had begun to murmur. The angels who guarded the firmament looked upon the rising monument and saw in it the reflection of another rebellion, one older, one that began before the shaping of dust. And among them was an angel who remembered. He descended unseen, cloaked in the silence between winds, his wings dimmed by sorrow. He walked through the camp disguised as a weary traveler, his eyes deep with the color of rain. When he came to the foot of the tower, he placed his hand upon the stone and felt the vibration, pride, woven into clay. That night he entered Nimrod's tent. The guards did not see him. The torches did not flicker. The air itself held its breath. Nimrod lay awake, staring into the glow of dying embers. "King of men," the voice said, soft as falling ash. Nimrod turned. "Who dares enter without command?" "I am a messenger," said the figure, his face hidden in the shadow of his hood. "One whose throne you seek." For the first time in many years, Nimrod's confidence wavered. He rose slowly, his eyes narrowing. "And what does your master command?" The stranger's voice carried no threat, only grief. "He does not command, he grieves that the son of dust has mistaken his silence for absence." Nimrod laughed, but it was hollow. "If he grieves, let him come down and speak himself." The angel stepped closer. "He will." A hush filled the tent. For a moment neither spoke. Then the wind outside shifted, a long, mournful breath that swept through the encampment and extinguished every flame. The next morning the builders awoke to a sky of pure gold. The storm had broken, and in its wake came an eerie calm. Birds circled the two. Whirs crowned, their cries echoing like the voices of prophets. Nimrod ascended to the highest point, his heart alight with triumph. He looked down upon the multitude, his kingdom stretched farther than the eye could see, rivers bending like silver veins across the earth. He raised his arms and shouted, "Now the world is one tongue, one will, one people beneath my hand. The heavens have no power over me." But even as he spoke, the air thickened, not with thunder this time, but with stillness, vast and absolute. The kind that comes before revelation. Then it began. Voices. Countless voices rising all at once, builders shouting, workers calling, each trying to speak, but their words broke apart like shattered glass. One man cried for water. His brother answered in sounds no one had heard before. Confusion rippled through the ranks, spreading like flame through dry straw. Nimrod descended, furious, commanding them to continue, but no one understood his command. The unity he had forged crumbled in a single heartbeat. Each tribe turned inward, speaking in tongues unknown to the other. The tower fell silent except for the chaos below. He looked upward, and for the first time the sky seemed distant, unreachable. He lifted a stone to hurl it toward heaven, his rage burning through tears he would not name. "Coward God," he cried, "show yourself." The wind answered, not in wrath but in mourning. Swept through the scaffolds and the tents, carrying away the sound of his defiance until only a whisper remained. "O Nimrod," it said, "you have built your tower not of stone but of pride, and pride cannot reach the throne of mercy." The word struck his heart, though he would never confess it. That night the tower cracked, not from a storm or quake, but from silence itself. The sound was low, sorrowful, as if the earth sighed in relief. Dust fell like rain, covering the footprints of those who fled in fear. When morning came, the great ziggurat of Nimrod stood unfinished, swallowed by mist. Its builders had scattered across the earth, each carrying a new tongue, a new burden. The unity of Babel was no more, and Nimrod, once the mightiest of kings, stood alone beneath the broken sky. He gazed upon his fallen dream, and for the first time the fire in his eyes dimmed. He spoke to the emptiness, "You win, O unseen one, but I will not kneel." He turned and walked into the desert, vanishing into the haze of dawn. Some say he wandered until he found the lands of fire, where he built cities beneath the sand. Others whisper that he met the angel again, not in wrath, but in mercy. Yet no man knows where Nimrod's bones were laid, only that the wind still carries his name, not as a king, but as a warning. And sometimes, when the night is very still, travelers say they hear a voice in the wind asking the same question that began it all. If heaven is silent, who then is king? The desert does not forget. It remembers every footprint, every whisper, every king who thought he could command eternity. Long after the tower crumbled, the wind still carried the scent of burnt clay and pride. And in the heart of that silence, a figure wandered, no longer crowned, no longer followed, but still burning. Nimrod walked as one haunted by the echo of his own name. He had once been a builder of worlds. Now he was only a shadow moving through sand. Yet even in ruin, he carried himself like a monarch, head lifted, eyes unbroken. The dust rose around him as though reluctant to settle upon one who had once defied the heavens. He came to a plain of blackened stone, where the wind sang low like mourning. There, the last embers of Babel's fire had gathered, the remnants of what once sought to touch the sky. He knelt, and for a long time he said nothing. Then, with hands that had built an empire, he gathered the ashes and let them slip through his fingers. "They still rise," he whispered. "Even in ruin they rise." But the wind answered, cold and sharp, carrying with it the faintest voice, the kind that comes not from the earth but from within the soul. Ashes rise only when the flame refuses to rest. He froze. It was not a memory. It was not madness. It was the same voice that had spoken in his dreams before the tower fell, the same voice that had told him to build. "Who are you?" He called into the silence. The air shifted, trembling with unseen power. "I am the one who watched when you raised your hand against the sky." Nimrod rose slowly, the wind pulling at his tattered robes. "Then speak plainly," he said. "If you are the voice of the heavens, tell me, why was I made with a heart that burns for the impossible?" There was no answer. Only the distant rumble of thunder where no clouds yet gathered. And then, softer than breath, came the reply. "You were not made to rule the light, Nimrod. You were made to see what pride does in its absence." He clenched his fists. "If that is true, then heaven is cruel." The voice fell. Dead, the wind calmed. Only the sound of his heartbeat remained, loud, lonely, human. For the first time since his youth, Nimrod felt the weight of flesh. His body, once radiant with strength, now trembled beneath the sun. The hunger of kingship had left him hollow. And yet beneath the exhaustion something strange stirred, the faint pulse of regret. He thought of his people, scattered across the earth. Of the faces that once looked to him for light, now lost in foreign lands, speaking tongues they did not understand. Of the tower that had promised unity and ended in confusion. Was it not mercy that undid him? For had the heavens wished to destroy, they could have struck him dead. Instead, they let him live, to wander, to remember, to ache. He wandered through the lands that would one day be called Mesopotamia, through Uruk's early walls, through the ruins of Akkad's nameless tribes, through the fading paths of men who no longer sang his name. Everywhere he went, the earth seemed to mourn, the rivers choked with dust, the temples empty of song. And yet within these ruins, Nimrod began to see something the tower had hidden from him, the quiet beauty of humility. A widow lighting her lamp at dusk, whispering a prayer over bread. A shepherd weeping softly over his flock. A child drawing lines in the dust, shaping a house smaller than a man's hand. Each act, small and unseen, felt like defiance not against heaven but against despair. He began to sleep by the riverside, watching the stars return each night as if nothing had changed. The constellations glowed like old friends he had once tried to conquer. He remembered the dream, the ladder of light, the fall, the ash. Perhaps, he thought, the ladder was never meant to be climbed. Perhaps it was only meant to be seen. But pride is not easily silenced. Even in reflection, the fire whispered. "You were made for more than dust," it said. "The heavens still fear you." And for a moment Nimrod almost believed it again. He stood, heart trembling between repentance and defiance, staring into the night until the stars blurred like tears. In that half-dreaming state between sleep and memory, he saw again the tower, not broken but whole. Its peak touched the moon. Its walls gleamed with gold. And at its summit stood a throne, empty, waiting. He reached for it, and the moment his hand touched the armrest, the vision shattered. He awoke gasping, the ashes of Babel beneath his palms. The desert wind whispered through the dark. This time the voice was softer, human, almost tender. "You built for glory, not for remembrance, but even the forgotten are seen." Nimrod looked up, his eyes wet though no tears fell. The stars shimmered above him, patient, eternal. And for the first time he did not curse their height. He bowed his head to the dust and whispered, "Then let the ashes remember me kindly." The night answered with silence, a silence that did not condemn but understood, the kind that follows confession when words are no longer needed. And so he slept there beneath the heavens he once challenged, his breath slow, his heart no longer burning, only glowing like a coal learning to rest. The years passed, and Nimrod's name became a ghost, half memory, half myth. The plains that once trembled beneath his command grew quiet again. Cities rose where his tower had fallen, but none bore his name. Time, that silent conqueror, began to erase him. And yet far to the west, in the land where the twin rivers met, a new voice had risen, one that spoke not of dominion but of surrender. A prophet had come among men. His name was Ibrahim, peace be upon him. He spoke of the unseen God not as a distant ruler, but as the one who breathes life into dust and gathers the stars by name. When word reached Nimrod of this preacher, this wanderer who dared to speak of a greater kingdom, the old fire stirred within him once more. The embers he thought had cooled began to glow. "Another dares to speak of the sky," he said. "Then let him stand before the one who has seen it." Messengers were sent across the desert. The prophet came without fear, clothed in white linen, his face calm as still water. When he entered Nimrod's court, the air itself seemed to hush, as though creation had paused to listen. The hall was vast, lined with columns of black stone carved in the likeness of the stars. Gold light from 100 torches flickered across Nimrod's throne, where he sat in silence, watching. "You are the one they call Ibrahim," said the king. His voice was low, deep, still bearing the weight of command. The prophet bowed his head. "I am he, O king." Nimrod leaned forward. "They say you speak of a God greater than kings, a Lord who cannot be seen, yet commands the world. Tell me, where is this Lord of yours? For I have looked upon the sky, and it answers to no one." Ibrahim's eyes were soft, but his words were steady. "He is the one who gives life to the seed and calls it from the earth. He is the one who grants you breath, O Nimrod, and could take it before your next." A murmur swept through the court. The guards gripped their spears, but Nimrod only smiled, though there was a tremor in it, faint, buried deep. "Then if your Lord gives life," he said, "I too give life, and I'll take it." He gestured, and 2 prisoners were brought forth. One he ordered released, the other struck down. "See, I give life to one and death to another. Is that not power?" The prophet looked at him, not in anger but in sorrow. "You grant neither, O king, you only play at judgment. True power is not in choosing who breathes, but in commanding the breath itself." Nimrod's smile faded. "Then prove your Lord's strength." Ibrahim turned his face toward the high windows where the dawn was breaking. "My Lord brings the sun from the east. If you are as you claim, bring it from the west." The court fell still. Even the torches seemed to bow in the silence that followed. Nimrod's jaw tightened. His eyes, once bright with pride, dimmed like a flame starved of air. For the first time since his youth, he had no words. The prophet bowed and turned to leave. But before he passed the threshold, he said softly, "Your tower fell because you sought the throne of heaven. Yet even now mercy follows you. The Lord does not despise the one who wanders, only the one who refuses to look up." When the prophet had gone, Nimrod sat alone upon his throne, surrounded by the echo of his own silence. The court dismissed itself quietly, as though fearing the weight of what had just been spoken. He remained there long into the night. No guards, no courtiers, no banners. Only the flicker of dying lamps and the sound of the wind pressing through the windows. He thought of the prophet's calm, that strange peace, like a man who carried light not in his hands but in his heart. He envied it, not because it was powerful, but because it was free. That night he dreamed. He stood once more before the tower, but this time it was not made of brick or stone. It was made of glass, and within each pane burned the faces of every soul he had ruled, faces now silent, watching him. At the summit stood a figure robed in white, Ibrahim. In his hands he held a single flame. "This," said the prophet in the dream, "is what you sought, the light of the throne. but you tried to seize it. It was meant to be received." And with that the flame was set upon the glass, and the tower melted into rivers of gold that washed Nimrod's feet. He awoke with tears upon his face, his heart heavy, yet strangely light. The wind outside carried the faintest sound of prayer, not his own, but one that rose beyond him into the night sky. He whispered, "The sun rises from the east, and I am still alive to see it." For the first time he did not take that as proof of his strength, but as mercy undeserved. The next morning the people saw their king walking barefoot through the streets of his city. He spoke to no one. He carried no crown. When they called his name, he only raised his hand in silence and said, "If you see a man praying, do not mock him. He may be nearer to the throne than I have ever been." And then he walked beyond the city walls, following the path of the prophet toward the horizon where the light begins. The wind that followed him was not cruel this time. It was gentle, almost guiding. And as it passed over the ruins of Babel, the ashes lifted once more, not in pride but in peace. The sun had not yet risen when Nimrod reached the valley. The air was thick with incense and murmurs, the sound of priests chanting around a pit of stone and flame. Their robes shimmered in the firelight, their faces hard as carved idols. This was the place of judgment, where those who opposed the king's will were brought to be purified by fire. He had come here many times before as ruler, as witness, as judge. But never as a man seeking answers. The flames leapt high, licking the night with tongues of gold and red. He stood before them, his face half illuminated, half in shadow. The memory of the prophet's calm words still clung to him. "My Lord brings the sun from the east." Nimrod's lips trembled. "And yet he allows the fire to burn," he whispered. From the darkness a familiar voice answered, "Does he? Or have you only ever seen what burns?" He turned sharply. The angel was there again, the same figure he had met on the night before Babel's fall. His presence did not shake the air this time. It was quiet, almost human. Only his eyes betrayed the heavens, deep, endless, sorrowful. "Why do you haunt me?" Nimrod asked. "I do not haunt," the angel said. "I remember. You were not meant for destruction, O king, only for understanding." Nimrod gestured toward the flames. "Then tell me what understanding lies in this. The fire consumes. It does not forgive." The angel's gaze lingered on the pit. "Do you remember the prophet you mocked?" Nimrod's jaw tightened. "I remember. He was brought here once," said the angel, "by your command." The words struck Nimrod like an arrow. He stared at the fire, his heart pounding. He was thrown into this. The angel nodded, and the fire did not touch him. Nimrod stepped forward. The memory came unbidden. The crowd gathered, the prophet bound, his calm unwavering even as flames roared around him. Nimrod had watched from his throne that day, expecting screams, expecting ash. Instead, he had seen the impossible, the prophet standing amidst the fire, untouched, surrounded by a light brighter than the blaze itself. He had forgotten that moment, buried it beneath pride and politics, called it trickery, refused to speak of it. But now the memory returned in full, and it broke something inside him. "I saw it," he whispered. "I saw him stand where no man should. I saw the fire bow." The angel's voice softened. "And yet you did not kneel." Nimrod's breath caught. His knees trembled. "I could not," he said, almost pleading. "To kneel was to admit I was wrong, that all I built was built upon dust. And what of now?" He looked to the sky. Dawn was breaking. The first light of morning touched the flames, turning them pale and pure. "Now," he said quietly, "I no longer fear the dust." The angel stepped beside him. "Then the fire is no longer your enemy." The wind shifted, carrying sparks into the air, soft, harmless, like drifting stars. Nimrod felt their warmth upon his skin and did not flinch. He closed his eyes. In the silence, he remembered the prophet's face, unafraid, radiant with faith. He remembered the words he had once mocked. "My Lord is the one who gives life and takes it." A tear, small and unseen, slipped down his cheek. "If there is forgiveness in the heavens," he said, "let it fall upon the one who did not understand." The angel turned to him, and for a moment the valley seemed to fade, the world hushed, the light softened, and Nimrod stood once more at the border between dust and eternity. "There is forgiveness," the angel said, "but it is not given to the proud, it is given to those who ask." Nimrod bowed his head. "Then I ask." The words were simple, almost lost to the wind, but they carried the weight of every tower he had built, every cry he had silenced, every prayer he had ignored. The fire before him flared not in wrath but in welcome. The heat did not burn, it enveloped him like warmth from a long-forgotten home. The angel stepped back, watching in silence as the king who once defied heaven stood within the circle of light. His robes did not char, his flesh did not blister. The flames rose around him like wings, whispering in tongues only the soul could hear. When the light faded, Nimrod still stood. The pit was cold. The priests who had once worshipped him fell to their knees in awe and fear. He looked at them, his face calm, his voice soft as morning wind. "The fire does not belong to kings," he said. "It belongs to the one who commands it." He turned to the horizon where the first edge of the sun lifted, golden, merciful, eternal. "Let it rise," he murmured. "Let it rise as it always has." The angel's voice, faint now, followed him as he walked away. "You sought to defy the heavens, O son of dust. Yet in your repentance, you became nearer than you ever were in your rebellion." And the wind carried those words into the distance, weaving them into the heart of the desert where stories are born and forgotten. That day, the people of Babel spoke of a miracle that their king had entered the fire and come out untouched. But Nimrod never spoke of it again. He disappeared into the sand soon after, walking eastward, following the path of the rising sun. Some say he found peace. Others say he vanished into light. But the desert remembers, for it was there that the mightiest of men learned that no throne stands higher than humility, and no fire burns purer than forgiveness. And if you listen closely, when the dawn wind sighs across the ruins of Shinar, you may still hear his voice, not shouting, not commanding, but whispering like a prayer. The fire did not burn. They say the desert swallows all things, temples, bones, kingdoms, even names. But some truths refuse to die. They sleep. And in the hollow places beneath the dunes, the echoes of Nimrod's empire still breathe, soft as embers in ash. The sands of Shinar were never still. The wind that once carried the voices of Babel now carried whispers of a city unseen, a place that was said to rise only when the moon was full and the world forgot to breathe. There beneath the shifting earth, the remnants of the old king's dream endured. Walls of gold swallowed by silence, columns carved with the language of the stars. Statues whose eyes were gems that no longer reflected the sun. The shepherds who crossed that wasteland spoke of strange heat rising from the ground, warmth where there should have been cold. They said the dew nest glowed faintly at night as though something below still burned. They called it Aram Alamad, the city of pillars. But the elders whispered another name, Nimrod's rest. No man knew if it was myth or memory, only that the air around it felt thick, ancient, alive. And so it was told that Nimrod did not die in the fire, nor vanish into light. He walked east, and the desert took him, not in death, but in silence. Some say the earth opened and received him whole, sealing him beneath the sands as a warning and a sign. The Bedouin tells that his body never decayed, for the fire that once defied the heavens could not be touched by decay. His eyes were closed, yet beneath the lids a faint light still glowed as though his soul was still watching. But this is not a tale of death. It is a tale of remembrance. For every empire leaves behind its bones and every soul its echo. And deep beneath the sand the old king dreamed. He dreamed of water, of rivers running beneath golden streets, of towers that rose not from pride but from prayer. In his sleep he saw the world reborn, not ruled by him but healed by the one he had once defied. In that dream Nimrod was not a king. He was a child again, standing barefoot in the dust, looking up at the stars. And the stars did not seem distant anymore. But even dreams are not safe from time. The centuries passed, kingdoms rose and fell, and still the sand shifted above him, whispering his name in languages long forgotten. The prophets came and went, their words like lanterns in the night, and still the ruins waited. Until one night, a caravan traveling between Ur and Damascus lost its way. The wind rose fierce and strange, guiding them toward a hollow in the earth that no map had marked. There by moonlight, they saw the glint of stone half buried, a doorway shaped like an eye, staring upward through the sand. When they cleared it, they found steps descending into the deep. The air that rose from below was warm, dry, and fragrant, as though trapped incense had waited for centuries to breathe again. They entered with torches and found a hall vast and circular, its ceiling painted with constellations. In its center lay a throne of dark stone, and upon it a figure draped in faded robes of crimson and gold. No dust lay upon him. No decay touched his face. His hands were folded upon his chest, and in his grasp a scepter shaped like flame. The leader of the caravan fell to his knees. "By Allah," he whispered, "he still breathes." But the man did not stir. They said the air around him shimmered, a veil between worlds. And though they fled in terror, one of them stayed behind long enough to notice an inscription carved upon the wall behind the throne. It was written in a tongue none could read, but which the soul seemed to understand. He sought the heavens, and the heavens were silent. He sought the earth, and it too was silent. And in that silence he found what no king ever found: peace. When the man returned to the world above, he was never the same. His eyes carried the look of one who had seen both mercy and judgment resting in the same breath. The story spread like the wind. Men came from far lands to seek the sleeping king, some for treasure, some for faith, some for proof that the old stories were true. None returned, but the desert, merciful and cruel, kept its secret. The dunes shifted again, covering the doorway, sealing the memory. The sands moved as though tucking the past back into sleep. And so Nimrod's empire remained unseen, unspoken, unbroken by time. Its streets were the dreams of the proud, its silence the prayer of the forgiven. And above it the wind carried a single truth through the ages, that no tower built of pride will endure, but the heart that kneels even in the ashes will outlast the stones of every empire. The desert does not forget. It only waits, and beneath the sand the fire still dreams. The desert's breath grew still. Even the stars above seemed reluctant to shine over the lands where Nimrod once walked. Beneath the dunes, beneath time itself, silence reigned, but silence is not the same as emptiness. For within those buried halls, eyes that were not mortal kept their vigil. The watchers. They were not angels, nor jinn, nor the shades of the dead. They were the memory of the first rebellion, remnants of those who had looked upon men and envied their clay. Bound between worlds since the days of Idris, they lingered where light could not reach, whispering to the stones and guarding what men must not find. When Nimrod's body was laid in the hollow earth, the watchers stirred. They had seen pride before in the heavens when Iblis refused to bow. But Nimrod was different. He was not made of fire. He was made of dust, and yet he had dared to rise where even angels feared. They saw in him not blasphemy, but reflection. So they gathered around him, unseen, unaging, and the sand sealed above. For 1,000 years they watched. The dunes shifted, the stars changed their place in the sky, and still they did not sleep. They whispered among themselves in tongues older than speech. "The fire of man is brief," one said. "Yet this one's flame endures." "Because he saw the throne," said another, "and still chose to stand." "And yet," murmured a third, "he knelt before he slept." That is what the heavens desired to see. Their voices were like the rustle of leaves in an unseen wind, soft, endless, mournful. Time passed differently beneath the sand. Seasons above turned to centuries below. Civilizations rose and perished while the watchers remained, trapped in the endless middle between punishment and purpose. And through it all, Nimrod's form did not fade. His soul, though freed, left behind a trace, a presence that hummed like a dying star. They guarded that remnant, not to protect it, but to understand it. For the watchers, too, sought redemption. Each believed that in Nimrod's story lay a mirror of their own fall, a creature of clay who rose, defied, and yet was forgiven. If the Most High could show mercy to him, perhaps there was mercy left even for them. But mercy is not easily found in the shadows. There came a night when one among them, bold and restless, broke the silence. His name was Samiaz, once a leader among the hosts that had watched the daughters of men. His wings had long since turned to dust, yet his pride still burned. He stood before Nimrod's still form and spoke aloud. "O king of men, whose fire rivaled our own, tell me, what did you see when heaven looked upon you? Was it wrath, or was it a wonder?" The air trembled faintly. The torches of eternal flame flickered. Then came a whisper, soft, human, and impossibly distant. Neither wrath nor wonder, only sorrow. The watchers fell silent. Even Samiaz bowed his head. For a moment they thought the dreamer stirred, that his eyes might open, that the silence of ages might break. But no. Only the faint hum of the unseen flame pulsed through the air, and the whisper faded into memory. The watchers withdrew to their stations, yet something had changed. The halls no longer felt like a tomb. They felt like a waiting room between worlds, the breath before resurrection. And above, far beyond the dunes, the sky began to move. New stars emerged, constellations that none of the old seers had named. Their light pierced through the desert night and touched the ground where Nimrod slept. The watchers saw it. They trembled. "The covenant renews," one said. "The world turns toward its reckoning again," another replied. "For every era brings its Nimrod, a builder of towers, a seeker of thrones, a child of dust who dreams of the impossible." And the watchers knew, when that time came again, the king beneath the sand would stir. Not in body, but in memory. They began to sing not a song of rebellion, but of remembrance, a hymn older than Babel, older than the flood. A song that once filled the air before the first light was spoken into being. Their voices wove through the chambers like rivers of gold, and in their song was both mourning and hope. Above, the desert shifted. Sand slid like water, uncovering for a moment the outline of the ancient doorway, the same one the caravan had found. Moonlight spilled down its steps like mercy descending. A traveler passing by that night saw it, a faint glow rising from the earth. He knelt, thinking it a mirage, but the warmth of it touched his face. He heard something, a distant chant, soft as breathing. He fled before dawn, but his heart was never free of the sound. He swore the earth itself was singing. And so the legend grew that beneath the sand of Shinar, angels wept and kings dreamed. That the ruins of Babel were not ruins at all, but a veil covering the waiting heart of the world. And though centuries turned to dust, the watchers waited still for the day when heaven would open once more, and the voice that had whispered sorrow would whisper again, "Rise." Until then, they kept their vigil. They kept the fire. They kept the memory of the king who once challenged the sky, and in doing so, taught even the heavens how to forgive. There are nights when the desert sighs like a sleeping beast, long, slow, full of dreams it cannot wake from. And if you stand very still in those hours before dawn, you might feel the pulse beneath your feet, faint, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something vast and buried. That is the breath of Nimrod's city. For deep beneath the dunes of forgotten Shinar, where no bird flies and no rain has fallen for 1,000 years, the empire beneath the sand endures. Not in gold or walls or weapons, but in memory, in the echo of a kingdom that refused to die, even when its king found peace. The watchers still kept their vigil. They did not sleep, for they were not bound by flesh. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting the remnants of a divine fire they had once known. They no longer whispered, "Oh, rebellion." They whispered of balance, of the strange mercy that allows ruin to become revelation. And slowly, over centuries uncounted, the empire began to change. The walls, though unmoving, seemed to breathe. The torches never died, though no hand tended them. The halls filled with sound, not of speech, but of memory, the faint murmurs of countless lives that once belonged to Babel. Each sigh of wind that passed through the world above found its way here. Each prayer whispered by the descendants of men carried a faint echo that reached this hollow heart of the earth. The city lived, not by time but by remembrance. There were chambers that glowed faintly blue, the color of moonlit water, where the names of those who built Babel were inscribed. There were gardens carved of salt and light, where roots grew without soil, drinking from the dew of eternal flame. And there was a single river, hidden and silent, flowing in a perfect circle around the throne. Its waters were not water, they were memory, gathered from all ages of man, flowing without beginning or end. It was said that if a soul wandered here, it would see not its reflection but its truth. And so it was one night that a wanderer came. No one knew his name. He was a seeker of forgotten things, a pilgrim drawn by stories of the city that dreams. He carried no map, no light, only faith that the desert hides nothing from those who walk without pride. The sands guided him. Each step sank softly, each gust of wind seemed to clear his path. By the third night he saw it a shimmer on the horizon, not of heat but of light. He followed it until his feet met stone. There, half buried, was the great doorway of Nimrod's rest, uncovered once more by the restless winds. He descended the ancient steps. The air grew warmer, then still, then heavy, not with danger but with presence. At the final step he entered a vast chamber. The throne still stood, but the body upon it was gone. In its place the throne burned faintly, not with fire but with radiance, and before it, kneeling in reverence, were figures made of light and dust, the Watchers. They did not move when he entered. They only turned their faces toward him as if they had been expecting his arrival since the dawn of time. He fell to his knees, trembling. "What is this place?" A voice, not loud yet filling the air, answered, "This is the memory of what pride destroyed and mercy rebuilt." The wanderer looked up and saw upon the wall a single inscription glowing faintly. "To those who rise without kneeling, this place will be silent. To those who kneel without fear, this place will be sung." He wept, not for Nimrod, not for himself, but for all men, for the endless circle of building and breaking, of reaching and falling. The Watchers rose, their faces soft as dawn. "Do you hear it?" One asked. He listened. At first he heard nothing, only his heartbeat and the hush of air. Then faintly he heard it, the sound of thousands of hearts breathing together, the sound of creation remembering its maker. "The city lives," he whispered. "It does," said another Watcher, "because the one you call upon never forgets even those who tried to defy him." The light grew brighter, as if the city itself exhaled after an eternity of waiting. The river of memory shimmered. The throne glowed like a rising sun, and the wanderer saw, not with eyes but with spirit, the figure of a man standing within that light. He was robed in fire that did not burn, crowned with the dust of the earth. His eyes held both sorrow and peace. It was Nimrod, not as a tyrant, not as a king, but as a man who had finally become whole. He spoke, not to the wanderer alone, but to all who would one day hear the wind pass over these sands. "I sought the heavens and found their silence. I sought the earth and found its dust. But in the silence between the two, I found the voice of the one I had forgotten. He was never far, only quiet." The vision faded. The Watchers bowed. The city grew still again, but this time its stillness was peace, not exile. The wanderer returned to the surface as dawn broke. He turned to look back, but the entrance was gone, swallowed again by the sands as though it had never been. When he reached the first village beyond the dunes, he told them what he had seen. They did not believe him. But that night, the wind that swept through their tents carried a fragrance none could name, warm, sweet, like fire and rain meeting in the same breath. And those who could not sleep swore they heard a heartbeat beneath the ground. It was the empire beneath the sand, breathing still, waiting for the next dawn, for the next soul brave enough to listen. Long before the tower rose, before Nimrod's crown caught the light of defiance, there were builders, men of dust and calloused hands who thought they were serving glory, not rebellion. They did not know they were laying the bones of a curse. They were shepherds once, wanderers who followed stars. Then came the call, a voice, not divine but commanding, carried through the camps by messengers draped in crimson and gold. "Come, build for eternity. Let your names rise with the stones. And so they came from the hills of Aram, from the valleys of Akkad, from the shores where the rivers met. They came for a promise, for purpose, for a name that might outlast breath. They built beneath a sky too wide to comprehend, each sunrise gilding their sweat with divine illusion. Nimrod's voice filled their hearts with fever. You are no longer servants of the earth, you are architects of the sky. And for a time it felt holy. The rhythm of hammer and chant became prayer. Children were born in the shadow of that tower. Women sang as they ground grain beneath its rising walls. The dust became their scripture, but pride has a scent. It sweetens the air before it rots. The masons began to quarrel about whose bricks were higher, whose hands shaped the first arch. When storms rose and swept away scaffolds, they said the heavens were jealous. When their children fell ill, they whispered that it was the price of greatness. The priests of Babel came soon after, robed in white, eyes sharp as blades. They said Nimrod was chosen by the stars, that his heart burned with the same fire as the angels. They carried censers filled with smoke that clouded both the air and the mind. The builders began to believe that they too were chosen not as men, but as co-creators. They carved symbols into the bricks, spirals, eyes, suns, thinking that by shaping matter they could command meaning. Each night when the fires dimmed, one could hear them whisper, "We are climbing to where the angels fell." And so the curse began not with a word from heaven, but with a thought born of earth. For curses are not always spoken, they are often built. The tower itself became their witness. The higher it climbed, the heavier their hearts grew. Their tongues no longer sang the same tune. The chants that once rose in unity now clashed like storms. When they reached the height where clouds brushed their scaffolds, the wind began to sound strange, as if it carried voices not their own. Some swore they heard laughter, others weeping. One mason, old and trembling, stopped his work and said, "We are no longer building toward heaven, we are burying ourselves beneath it." But his voice was lost beneath the sound of progress. They worked through night and day, unmoved by thunder, unbroken by exhaustion. They forgot the names of their fathers, they forgot to rest. Their hearts beat to the rhythm of ambition, a music that drowned out prayer. Then one morning, when the sun broke through a crimson haze, the first crack appeared. It was small, almost delicate, a hairline fracture across the face of the stone. Yet when the mason touched it, the wall shuddered, not from weakness, but from resistance. It was as if the tower itself no longer wished to rise. The builders stepped back, afraid. They heard something inside the stone, a sound like breathing, like the tower had grown a soul. And then came the whisper, soft at first, then everywhere at once. "Stop!" The word ran through the walls, through the bricks, through the very marrow of those who built. But Nimrod would not hear it. He ascended, shouting to the crowd below, "Do not listen. The heavens fear what we have become." And the crowd, caught between awe and terror, obeyed. The whisper became a cry, then silence. The cracks spread like veins of shadow, but the tower still stood. They built until their hands bled. They built until they no longer remembered why. Then one day the sky dimmed, not from a storm, but from sorrow. The air itself grew heavy. The wind ceased to move. And into that silence came confusion, sudden, complete, merciful. One mason spoke to another, and the other did not understand. Another called for his son, and his son answered in words that were foreign to his ear. In the space of a heartbeat, the unity that had raised a tower became 1,000 scattered tongues. They screamed in terror. They cried to their gods, to Nimrod, to the sky. But no answer came, only the echo of their own noise, a chaos that no man could tame. The tower groaned as though sighing with relief. The curse was complete, for pride had reached its limit and found its silence. That night the builders fled. They wandered into the wilderness in groups that no longer knew one another's words. The great fire of Babel dimmed behind them, swallowed by the dust of dawn. But the curse did not leave them. It followed in their blood, in their speech, in their endless hunger to build and break. Every kingdom born after carried its shadow. Every city that rose from the earth carried the faint echo of that confusion. And thus the world was divided not by geography, but by pride. The wind that passed over the ruins whispered still, "Hands that reach too high will forget how to hoe." LD, morning came to Babel like a wound that refused to close. The air hung heavy with dust and disbelief. The tower stood half-shattered, its peak lost in mist, its foundations humming with the strange quiet that follows divine intervention. All around its base, men and women shouted to one another, desperate to rebuild, to reassert the rhythm that had once bound them. But their words broke apart like waves against stone. They spoke, yet no meaning bridged the air. The sound of confusion was terrible, a cacophony of pleading, of anger, of fear. Brothers glared at brothers. Mothers called to children whose eyes no longer understood. The language of unity, once a living thread among them, had been torn beyond repair. One woman lifted her hands to the sky and cried, "Lord of the heavens, why have you made us strangers to one another?" But her plea reached only silence, and in that silence the people began to change. Some grew bitter and violent, striking those who could not understand. Others fell to their knees, broken by the weight of what they had lost. But a few, a rare few, felt something else in the air, not punishment but mercy. They sensed the wisdom hidden in confusion, the mercy veiled as separation. For pride cannot speak softly, and the world, if it was to survive, needed the gentleness of difference. It was not destruction, it was a scattering. The first tribes began to leave. Some went north, toward the rivers where the reeds sang in the wind. Others turned south, where the earth bled red beneath their feet. They carried fragments of the old tongue in their throats, shards of Babel's broken melody. Each tribe believed it carried the truest words, the holiest meanings. And so, even in their dispersal, they built again. They built temples, altars, and cities. But the words they spoke to shape their walls were never the same. In the far west, the people of the sun began to call the heavens by names of fire. In the east, they called them by names of water. In the north, they prayed to the wind. In the south, they spoke to the dust. And the heavens listened, not in anger, but in silence deep enough to hold every tongue. Among those who stayed behind were the elders, men who had once sung Nimrod's praises but now sat among the ruins, too weary to flee. They gathered near the base of the tower, staring at its fallen scaffolds. One of them, the oldest among them, spoke slowly, his words foreign even to himself, yet strangely familiar to their hearts. "We were one," he said, "and in our oneness we forgot to listen. Now we are many, and perhaps we will finally hear." No one answered, but they bowed their heads as though the meaning had found them beyond speech. As night fell, strange lights began to dance among the ruins, blue and pale like breath on glass. The watchers who dwelled deep beneath the sand stirred again, for they knew what the confusion meant. It was not the end of Babel, but the beginning of mankind's long lesson that no tower of ambition could rise higher than humility. And so they sang softly, their voices weaving through the cracks of the fallen stone. Their song was not of grief, but of remembering, the hymn of what was once divine in man and what could be divine again. Above, the scattered tribes walked beneath new constellations, each naming the stars in their own tongue. They did not know that the same stars looked down upon them all, hearing every name as one. Among the wanderers was a scribe who carried a fragment of the old language, carved upon a clay tablet cracked by time. He kept it close to his chest, believing it was sacred, a key to reunite what had been broken. But when he tried to read it aloud, the words would not sound. They dissolved upon his tongue like mist. He fell to his knees and wept, not knowing that the true meaning of Babel could never be read, only lived. For the curse was never in the tongues themselves, but in the heart that sought to rule rather than remember. The years passed. The tower sank further into the sand. The wind took its dust and carried it across the earth until its breath became the soil of nations. Each civilization that rose bore a trace of Babel in its longing for unity, in its hunger for greatness, in its fear of divine silence. And perhaps that is why, even now, every language holds a word for heaven, yet none can describe it. Every heart speaks of light, yet no two see it the same. The tongues of dust were not a punishment, they were a mercy. For had man remained of one voice, his pride would have grown as boundless as the sky. It was division that preserved the world, confusion that saved it from fire. And so, the builders of Babel, scattered though they were, became the seeds of nations, the ancestors of every people who would one day pray again to the same unseen God, each in their own way. The watchers beneath the sand, hearing the first prayers rise again, turned their faces upward. The tower fell. One said, but the longing remained. And perhaps, whispered another, that is how he wished it to be, not one tower reaching upward, but 1,000 souls reaching in silence. Above them the desert wind moved softly through the night, carrying with it the faintest echo of the old tongue, not words but breath, as if the dust itself remembered the rhythm of unity. The tower was gone. The king was gone. But the story remained, spoken now in countless voices, each different, each divine. And somewhere far beyond the dunes, where the river met the sea, a child born to a wandering tribe spoke his first word. It was not of power nor pride. It was the word for light, and the heavens, though silent, smiled. When the dust had settled and the tongues of men had scattered to the corners of the earth, the tower remained, half standing, half dreaming. It was neither a ruin nor a monument. It was an echo carved in stone. No one climbed it anymore. The scaffolds had fallen, the fires were out. The air around it carried a strange stillness, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Only the wind moved freely there, whispering through the hollow bones of what once reached for heaven. The elders who remained called it the pillar of regret. They would sit at its base in silence, not to worship but to remember. Their prayers were wordless, a language of sighs, the rhythm of remorse. And though generations passed, the tower never fully crumbled. The stones held their place like memories refusing to fade. When storms came, they struck its sides and roared around it, yet the core stood untouched, not by strength but by sorrow. It was said that each stone remembered a name, a voice, a heartbeat. That if one listened closely at midnight, one could still hear them singing not the proud chants of old, but a softer hymn, fragile as breath. The song of broken stones. No two who heard it described it the same. To some, it was lament, the mourning of a world that had lost its unity. To others, it was hope, the voice of forgiveness seeping from the earth itself. And to those who listened long enough, it became both. The song did not rise, it descended. It was not made of melody but of memory. It carried the voices of those who built and those who broke, of the dreamers, the fallen, the forgiven. It began with the wind, a hollow hum that trembled through the cracks, joined by the whisper of sand sliding against stone. Then faintly came the echo of distant voices, layered like the waves of time. Woman's voice, soft as the first dawn. I laid the first brick. A man's, rough with regret. I believed it was for God. Another, trembling, fading. We built not to worship but to be remembered. And then a child's voice, bright, unbroken. Did he forget us? After that question, the tower would fall silent for a time, as though waiting for an answer it could no longer receive. Then quietly the wind would carry a single note, deep, resonant, tender. No. And the song would begin again. Those who came upon the ruins in later ages, traders, wanderers, prophets, all spoke of this song. Some said it healed the weary heart. Others said it drove proud men to their knees. A few who slept nearby claimed to dream of fire that did not burn, of cities beneath sand, of watchers made of light. They awoke weeping, not knowing why. The tower had become something more than stone. It was the memory of what happens when creation forgets its creator. It was a mirror held to every age. For every empire that came after, Egypt, Akkad, Rome, carried a piece of Babel in its bones. Each one raised walls to the sky, built monuments to power, and each in time fell to the same silence. The curse of the builders was not destruction. It was a remembrance, because to remember is to ache, and every stone that remembers must one day sing. One evening, many centuries after Nimrod had vanished into legend, a traveler came to the ruins. He was a poet, thin, worn, his eyes bright with the hunger of the soul. He carried no wealth, only a reed flute. He sat among the stones, closed his eyes, and began to play. The melody was slow, trembling, uncertain, the sound of a man speaking to something he could not see. As the notes rose, the wind joined him. The sand stirred, and for the first time in many generations, the song of broken stones changed its rhythm. It did not echo, it answered. Sound filled the plain, a haunting harmony of human breath and divine memory. The poet wept as he played, for he felt in that moment the truth that no language could hold, that all music, all beauty, all striving was a fragment of the same yearning, the yearning to return. He played until the stars rose. Then he lay back upon the earth, exhausted, and whispered to the night, "If they ever ask why we build, tell them it is because we once saw heaven and cannot forget." When morning came, he was gone. Only his flute remained, half buried beside a stone inscribed with words long unreadable. But the tower sang a little louder that day. Its echoes carried farther. Shepherds on distant hills heard it and paused, their hearts heavy with wonder they could not name. And the watchers deep beneath the sand listened too. "Do you hear it?" one said. "It is the voice of man remembering what he lost," replied another. "But he is learning," whispered the eldest. "He no longer sings to defy, he sings to understand." Above them, dawn broke. The sun touched the broken crown of Babel, turning it to gold. The wind sighed through the cracks, one final note, half sorrow, half praise. And somewhere in the unseen, a voice soft, eternal, murmured through the light, "Sing, children of dust, sing until silence becomes prayer." The stones trembled, not with pride but with peace. The song lingered, then faded into the horizon, a hymn carried by every breeze that ever touched the earth thereafter. And the tower that once defied heaven now kept its truest purpose, to remind the world that even the broken can sing. When the fire of Babel had cooled to dust and its echo had settled into the bones of the earth, men began again to build, not with stone, but with reflection. They built cities not of towers, but of eyes. Far from the ruins of Shinar, across the plains where the rivers met the sea, a new kingdom arose, one that believed it was untouched by the curse of the builders. Its palaces were mirrored, its walls shone like the surface of still water, and its king sat upon a throne of polished obsidian that reflected everything but himself. They called it Eresh, the city of light. But those who walked within its gates whispered a different name, the kingdom without shadows. For in Eresh the sun never set. Fires were kept burning through the night, torches placed in every window, mirrors hung from every pillar, so that not a single corner of the city knew darkness. "Darkness," the priest said, "is where heaven hides its secrets," and they would not allow heaven to hide again. The king of this city was not Nimrod, but he was Nimrod's heir in spirit, a descendant not by blood but by belief. He had inherited the same hunger, the same fire that cannot be extinguished, only passed from one heart to another. His name was Lugalen, meaning the Lord who sees. He was a man obsessed with sight. He studied the reflection of the moon upon the water and believed he saw the face of the divine looking back. He ordered pools dug across the city, each one filled with polished silver so that the heavens could be caught and studied. He said, "The sky is not beyond reach. It is only a mirror waiting to be understood." The priests adored him. The people worshipped him. They said that when he walked through the streets, the mirrors themselves bowed, bending light toward him. But those who worked in the depths of his palace, the servants, the night guards, spoke in hushed tones. They said that when the torches went out, the reflections did not vanish. They lingered, moving on their own. Faces flickered in glass that did not belong to any living man. One guard swore he saw the shadow of a crown hovering above the king's head, not of gold, but of flame. Lugalen laughed when he heard it. "If the light bows to me, let the flame crown me too." He did not know that pride, like light, burns what it touches. At the heart of his palace stood the throne of mirrors, a circle of obsidian slabs, each polished until they captured the faintest glimmer of breath. It was said that whoever sat there could see not only the world as it was, but the world as it wished to be. Each morning, the king sat upon that throne and gazed into the endless reflections that surrounded him. And in those mirrored depths, something began to move, not light, but memory. He saw cities rising, towers stretching, empires bowing. He saw Nimrod's face proud, unbroken, and behind it the burning sky of Babel. He reached toward it and the reflection smiled back. It was then that he began to hear the whispers. They came not from outside, but from within the mirrors, voices of fire and dust, ancient and knowing. "Build again," they said. "You are not cursed as he was. You are chosen." The king shivered, not from fear but from recognition. The voice was the same one that had once whispered to Nimrod on the plains of Shinar, the same ancient murmur that tempts those who dream beyond the boundaries of mercy. He summoned his architects. "The tower was never finished," he said. "It waits for us to complete it." The priests protested. "O king, the curse remains. The heavens divided men for a reason." But he silenced them. "The heavens are reflections, not rulers. If they divide us, then we will unite ourselves in their image." And so the building began anew, not in Shinar, but in Eresh, where light knew no rest. They did not build upward this time, but inward. Beneath the palace, they carved chambers of polished glass, tunnels lined with silver and gold, so that every face was reflected 1,000 times. As they dug deeper, their own images began to waver, no longer human, but elongated, shimmering, dreamlike. The workers spoke of hearing whispers echoing through the tunnels, though none could say in what tongue. The priests began to vanish. The king no longer appeared before his people. Only his voice was heard, calm, melodic, distant. And when the citizens of Eresh looked into their mirrors, they swore they saw another city looking back upside down, shimmering beneath them like a reflection beneath water. A city where Nimrod still ruled. A city where the tower had never fallen. Fear spread like a shadow beneath the light. For the curse of the builders had returned, not in stone, but in reflection. They had built not a tower, but a mirror that reached into the unseen, calling forth the memory of rebellion from beyond the veil. The watchers stirred again beneath the sand. They heard the sound of pride waking from its long sleep, and their sorrow deepened. "He rises again," one whispered, "not as king of dust, but as king of mirrors." And far away, where the Tower of Babel still stood half buried in silence, the wind began to hum the song of broken stones returning, darker this time, carrying both warning and lament. It whispered across the earth, through deserts and mountains, until it reached the shining walls of Eresh. The mirrors trembled, the reflections rippled. The king's face fractured into 1,000 pieces of light, but Lugalen only smiled. "So even the wind remembers me," he said. He did not know that the song was not remembrance. It was the sound of heaven whispering no once more. Deep beneath Eresh, where torches never dimmed and the air shimmered with fevered light, the king's architects worked until their eyes could no longer bear reflection. The mirrors no longer showed their faces, only shapes of light that bent and breathed like living things. Lugalen descended often into those depths, wrapped in white linen that glowed with oil. His footsteps echoed against the mirrored walls like the heartbeat of something immense. Everywhere he turned, he saw himself multiplied, perfected, endless. And yet among those countless reflections, one moved differently. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, a shimmer behind him, a delay in the glass. But as the nights passed, he began to notice it more clearly. One reflection did not obey. It did not turn when he turned, nor lower its head when he did. It watched him. He stood before it one night, staring into its eyes. The torches flickered, and in their trembling glow he saw what his heart had long forgotten to fear: sorrow. The reflection's eyes were full of sorrow. "Who are you?" the king demanded. His voice echoed endlessly, multiplied by glass. And from within the mirror came a whisper faint like breath upon water. "You are the echo of another's fall." He stepped closer. "Speak clearer." The voice deepened. "You are not the first to reach for the sky. You are only the memory of the one who did." The king's pulse thundered. He struck the mirror with his scepter. The surface rippled like living skin but did not shatter. He saw within it not his face but Nimrod's. The first king standing beneath the tower, eyes aflame with defiance. "Why do you haunt me?" he whispered. Nimrod's image smiled faintly, sadly. "Because you asked for light that knows no shadow, and light without shadow cannot reveal the truth." The reflection's voice changed. It was no longer Nimrod's. It had many voices, layered, human and angelic, sorrowful and kind. "The mirrors you build are not windows to heaven, they are windows to memory. And memory, O king, is where heaven hides its warnings." The king staggered back, trembling. "You lie. I am chosen. The light obeys me." The voices fell silent. Then softly a single one, childlike, whispered, "So said he who came before." The air cracked. Every mirror in the chamber trembled, rippling like the surface of a disturbed sea. The torches bent their flames toward the walls as if drawn by invisible breath. The king fell to his knees. His reflection multiplied infinitely around him, thousands of faces, each flickering with emotion. Some wept, some smiled, some turned away. He could not tell which was truly his. He crawled toward the central mirror, the first one, the oldest, the one he had called the Eye of Eresh. It was said to be made from the obsidian heart of a fallen meteor, a stone not born of earth. He pressed his palms against it. "Show me heaven," he pleaded. "If there is a God, let him speak to me." The mirror shivered, and within it bloomed a light unlike any fire. It was soft, endless, alive. The king's breath caught. He saw the shape of a throne, not built but being. Upon it sat no figure, and yet all presence. Around it were rivers of flame that sang. He fell forward, his forehead str. Eyeing the glass, tears spilled from his eyes. "I see it," he whispered. "I see what he sought." And the voice within the mirror, that same voice that once spoke to Nimrod, that ancient watcher between realms, answered him again. "Then do not touch it." But pride had long ago deafened him. He raised his hand, pressing his palm against the surface. The moment his skin met the mirror, the light changed. It flickered, then cracked, and from its depths poured shadows, long and alive. They filled the chamber like smoke. The reflections twisted, their faces turning away. The mirrors began to melt, their edges curling like paper in flame. The architects who labored above heard the sound, a deep, resonant moan like wind moving through a hollow world. They rushed down, only to find the corridors warped with light. Their own reflections stepped out from the walls, walking beside them, whispering their thoughts before they could speak. Panic spread through the palace. The priests gathered in the courtyard, chanting prayers to any god who would listen. The light of Eresh, once constant, began to flicker for the first time since the city's birth. And beneath the trembling kingdom, in the depths of the mirrored chamber, the king stood alone, surrounded by the remnants of himself. The mirror before him had darkened. It no longer reflected. It was absorbed. From its center, a shape began to form, tall, radiant, crowned with fire. It was not Nimrod now, but something else, something ancient enough to remember the birth of stars. The king fell back, his voice a broken whisper. "What are you?" The being's voice was neither wrathful nor kind. It was true, pure, unsoftened. "I am what pride summons when it stares too long into heaven." The chamber shuddered. The mirrors cracked from within, splintering into thousands of shards that caught the king's reflection in fragments, eyes, hands, a mouth whispering prayers too late. Light flooded the room, white, blinding, soundless. When it faded, the mirrors were gone. Only the throne remained, cold and still, reflecting nothing. The architects found nobody. Only a faint outline scorched into the obsidian floor, a silhouette of a man reaching upward. And though the fires of Eresh were rekindled, none ever burned as they once did. For when the people looked into their mirrors, they saw not their faces, but a faint crown of flame hovering above their heads, a reminder of the king who vanished into his own reflection. They learned too late that mirrors remember what men forget. And sometimes, memory is more faithful than light. When the light of Eresh died, it did not go out all at once. It dimmed slowly, like a breath fading from the world. The torches that had burned without rest for generations flickered and sank into themselves, their smoke curling upward in thin blue threads. The people of the city stood in the streets, staring into mirrors that no longer shone. The walls, once radiant with 1,000 reflections, had turned dark, not black, but hollow, like the color of a forgotten thought. And in that darkness, something strange began to happen. The mirrors whispered. At first it was faint, just the hum of old glass contracting with the cold. But soon it became clear. Words rose from within the mirrors, spoken in the voices of those long gone. Mothers heard the laughter of children who had died. Soldiers heard the cries of comrades lost to battle. The priests heard their own prayers echo back, twisted by time. Fear spread through the city like fire through oil. The people covered their mirrors with cloth and ashes, but the whispers did not stop. They seeped through walls, through sleep, through silence. One woman, driven by sorrow and courage, tore the veil from her mirror and stared into it, crying out, "What do you want from us?" The reflection smiled, her own face, but older, wiser, weary. "To be remembered," it said, and then the mirror cracked. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the city like thunder. Every mirror split in unison, and for a moment the entire kingdom was filled with light, pure, white, and silent. When the brightness faded, the people saw their city for what it had become. Eresh was no longer a kingdom of light. It was a graveyard of mirrors. Each shard reflected not beauty but truth, the sorrow of the builders, the pride of their kings, the ghost of every prayer spoken only to be forgotten. At the palace heart, the throne of mirrors stood untouched. Its surface no longer showed light. It showed nothing at all. Those who dared approach it said it drew warmth from the air, as if still remembering the fire that once lived there. No king sat upon it again. The priests decreed the throne cursed. They sealed the chamber beneath sheets of gold and began to pray to the unseen heavens they had once sought to capture. But some among them, those who had seen the reflection's sorrow, knew it was not a curse. It was a covenant for the sea. Lens that filled the glass was not void. It was mercy, because the mirrors, though broken, are still remembered. They remembered every face, every voice, every cry that had sought the divine and failed to find it. And in their remembering they carried the weight so that man might be free to try again. That night, as the people of Eresh slept in uneasy peace, a wind rose from the east, warm, fragrant, carrying the scent of desert myrrh. It moved through the shattered city like a ghost of dawn, brushing across the shards that covered the streets. Each fragment caught the moonlight, and for a brief moment the city shimmered again, not with pride but with peace. The broken mirrors glowed faintly, forming patterns upon the walls and streets, the outlines of constellations that mirrored the sky above. Those who woke to see it fell to their knees, for the stars seemed to descend, resting upon the ruins like blessings. The silence deepened. And in that silence some heard a voice, not from the sky, not from the earth, but from the space between. The throne of mirrors is the heart of man. When it is full of pride, it reflects only itself, but when it is broken, it reflects heaven. The words passed through every soul that still lingered in the city. Some wept, some smiled, some simply stood, feeling the weight within their chests ease as if the world itself had exhaled. By morning, the light had faded. The stars returned to their proper places, but the people of Eresh were changed. They no longer hung mirrors in their homes. They no longer sought to capture light. Instead, they built gardens, quiet, open, filled with water that reflected only the sky. And when they prayed not to be seen, but to be heard. In time, travelers passed through those lands and found the ruins of Eresh, its mirrored towers long collapsed, its palace buried beneath vines and dust. They spoke of the strange calm that lingered there, of how even the wind seemed gentle, unwilling to raise its voice. Some said that if you knelt upon the broken throne, you could still hear the faint whisper of the glass. Be still, the light has not left you, it has only learned to rest. And so it was said, the throne that once reflected pride became the mirror of humility, and its silence became the holiest of songs. Far away, beneath the sands of Shinar, the watchers felt the shift. One turned to the other and said, "The curse is healing." Another replied, "Then perhaps man has begun to see not through his mirrors but through his tears." They bowed their heads, and for the first time in an age, their wings moved not in rebellion but in reverence. Above them, the desert wind carried a single note, the sound of glass cooling after fire. It was the sound of peace. And though the cities of men would rise and fall again, though pride would return and mirrors would be built anew, the memory of Eresh endured in silence, whispering to every heart that sought to outshine heaven. The brightest light is born only when the mirror shatters. The sand remembers what the tongue forgets. Long after kings have turned to dust and their crowns to rust, the wind keeps their names, whispering them through the dunes like broken prayers. Beyond the ruins of Eresh, far to the south where the earth bends toward oblivion, there lies a valley without water, without life, without sound. The wanderers call it Wadi Alisma, Alesse Macron Qi letter 1E6 the Valley of the Fallen Names. They say it is where the echoes of pride come to die, and that every time the wind passes through it, the ghosts of old kings rise not in form, but in sound, to speak the names they built and the names they lost. It was here in this barren cradle of silence that Nimrod's last dream came to rest. The valley is endless, a sea of red earth and ancient bones. The sun burns so fiercely that even shadows seem to flee from its gaze. But when the night comes, the air trembles with whispers. Not human, not jinn, not wind, something deeper, something older. The tribes who pass near its borders never camp too close. They claim that the valley hungers for remembrance, that it draws near anyone who dares to forget the mercy of God. And yet sometimes, when the moon is full and the stars burn like oil lamps hung across the heavens, a pilgrim will wander into it, drawn not by curiosity, but by something like calling. Such was the journey of Al-Muthakir, the Rememberer, a scribe from the ruins of Babylon, a man whose eyes were dim from years of copying the words of prophets by the light of fading lamps. He had heard the tale of Nimrod since childhood, yet in his heart he could not reconcile it, how a man so defiant could still have found peace beneath the sand. So he came to the valley, carrying only parchment, ink, and faith trembling in his chest. When he entered, the wind died. The world grew heavy as if all of creation was holding its breath. He called out, "If any soul lingers here, W. Ho once bore the name of kingship, speak, for I seek not to judge but to understand." His voice echoed once, then fell away. And then, faintly, as though the air itself was remembering how to speak, came an answer. "We built towers of words before we built towers of stone." The scribe froze. "Who speaks?" The ground trembled softly as though stirred by something immense and unseen. From beneath the sand came a sound like 1,000 breaths drawn at once. "I am the dust that remembers every name." The scribe fell to his knees, his heart beating against his ribs. "O Lord," he whispered, "what place have I come to?" The voice continued, not loud but vast. "This is where pride forgets its face, where the echo of ambition is broken into silence, where even kings must learn to whisper their own names again." The wind rose slow, reverent. Each gust carried fragments of language, syllables from empires long gone, prayers in tongues no man remembered. The scribe heard Akkadian, Sumerian, Egyptian, Greek, Persian, each fading into one another like waves merging into a single sea. And through them all, one name returned again and again, not shouted but breathed. Nimrod, Nimrod, Nimrod. The scribe bowed low, his forehead pressed to the burning earth. "O king of dust," he said softly, "do you still wander here?" The wind answered not with words, but with light, faint, golden, rising from the ground like smoke. The sand around him shimmered, and for a moment he saw the valley transform. Where barren earth had been, there now stood pillars immense, ancient, glowing from within. Between them walked figures of light, faceless yet familiar, each carrying a tablet upon which their name had once been written. But the names were crumbling, the letters falling away like ash. One by one they released the tablets into the wind, and as the letters scattered, the light of their forms grew brighter. The scribe understood they were not losing their names. They were returning them. He wept. "O merciful one," he whispered, "even in the fall there is redemption." A voice, softer now, closer, spoke beside him. It was human, it was weary, it was Nimrod. "You write what others forget, you speak what others fear. Tell them this: no name is eternal but his." The scribe lifted his eyes. Before him stood a man clothed in dust and light, his face lined with sorrow, yet gentle beyond all measure. His eyes held the calm of one who had looked upon the truth and laid down his crown. The scribe trembled. "Are you?" Nimrod smiled faintly. "Once I was. Now I am what remains when pride is gone." He lifted his hand, and the valley seemed to still. "Do you hear them?" The scribe listened. The wind was full of names: Pharaoh, Caesar, Shaddad, Alexander, names that once ruled the world and now were nothing but sound. "They are not cursed," said Nimrod. "They are learning silence." The scribe bowed his head. "Then the valley is not a punishment." "No," said the king who had defied heaven. "It is mercy made visible." The light around Nimrod began to fade, dissolving into the wind. His voice lingered like the last note of a hymn. "Write this truth, O rememberer, that all who lift their names above the throne will one day bow beneath it, and blessed are those who bow willingly." The wind rose again, carrying with it the sound of countless voices, not in pride, not in fear, but in peace. The valley shimmered, then fell silent once more. The scribe sat there until dawn, writing upon his parchment the words the wind had given him. When he left, he did not look back. The valley had taken what it wished, his arrogance, and returned what he had not known he was missing: awe. And as he walked back toward the rising sun, he heard faintly the final whisper of the desert: "Remember us kindly." When Al-Muthakir left the valley, dawn still lingered like an ember upon the horizon. Yet though the sun was rising, the shadows behind him did not fade. They followed, silent, stretching long across the sands, as if the valley itself had not finished speaking. Each step he took carried weight. The air around him shimmered, heavy with the sound of memory. For though the valley had released him, it had also entrusted him with something ancient, a burden that was not his alone. He walked until the day became fire and the wind became blade. When thirst clawed at his throat and his strength began to wane, he found shade beneath a crumbling arch of stone, the ruin of a temple that had once been devoted to the god of the moon. Its walls were carved with half-erased names, like teeth worn smooth by time. He sat among them and unrolled his parchment, meaning to write what he had seen. But when he tried, his hands trembled. The ink bled into strange shapes of words he did not recognize, written in tongues that had not been spoken since Babel. The letters twisted upon the page, alive, breathing, and though he could not read them, he understood. "Odd, every name is a door," they whispered, "and every door opens toward remembrance." He closed his eyes and the wind rose. It was no longer the desert wind, but the wind of voices, thousands upon thousands, each whispering its name. Not with pride, not with fear, with longing. The sound filled the temple ruins until even the stones seemed to hum. And within that chorus, Al-Muthakir heard something that made his heart falter: the voice of Nimrod again, speaking not to him but through him. "Names are the first gift and the final mercy," it said. "For in the beginning the Most High taught Adam the names of all things, and by naming them he knew them. But man forgot that to name is also to serve. Every name that exalts itself beyond its meaning becomes dust." The scribe wept, his tears darkening the sand. "Then why do we still build monuments of words?" "Because the soul cannot bear silence," came the reply. "And yet it is silence that teaches the heart to speak." He bowed his head and the parchment slipped from his fingers, carried away by the wind. It rose and spun among the broken stones, its words glowing faintly in the air before dissolving into light. When he looked up, the temple was gone. In its place stretched the valley once more, vast, golden, eternal, and across its surface walked the bearers of names, the luminous forms he had seen before. But now he saw them clearly, not kings or prophets or wanderers, but every soul that had ever spoken its name into the world. They moved without weight, their feet leaving no mark upon the sand. Each carried its own reflection, not of light, but of memory. Some glowed softly, others flickered like candles in the wind, and as they passed him, they began to speak. A woman whose face was gentle as dusk whispered, "I was called mother, though I never bore a child." A man with eyes like rain said, "I was called builder, though I destroyed more than I made." Another voice, trembling yet radiant, murmured, "I was called queen, though I ruled only fear." Each confession became light. Each name, once a burden, became an offering. Al-Muthakir watched as the valley filled with radiance, each soul releasing the name it had once carried like a chain. The light gathered above them, forming a great cloud that pulsed with warmth, not fire, but forgiveness. He heard Nimrod's voice again, now distant, serene. When names are freed, the world is healed. For what is pride but a name refusing to return to its maker? The scribe's heart burned within him. Then what name shall I carry if all must be returned? The valley fell silent. Then a single word, soft as the breath between heartbeats, filled the air. Servant. He fell to the ground, sobbing not from shame, but from relief. For the word entered him like water entering dry earth, and in its wake all hunger ceased. The wind shifted again. The light drew back toward the horizon, melting into the dunes. The valley dimmed, returning to its quiet dust. When Al-Muthakir rose, he found the parchment he had dropped resting beside him. Upon it were only 7 words, written in a script both familiar and divine. The greatest name is the one unspoken. He rolled the parchment and pressed it to his heart. Then let this be my final writing. He left the valley as night descended, his shadow swallowed by moonlight. The dunes closed behind him like a door. In the years that followed, the scribe's writing spread across lands and tongues. Scholars debated their meaning, kings feared their warning, mystics whispered them to the wind. But none could agree on where he had gone, or whether the valley was real. Some said he was taken by angels. Others said he had become one of the nameless lights that wander the desert sky. Yet among the Bedouin, when the wind moans through the dunes, they still tell of the rememberer, the man who entered the valley of fallen names and emerged without one of his own. And in that story they find peace. For though kingdoms fall and languages fade, the truth remains, that the only name worth keeping is the one given by the Creator, and the only way to remember heaven is to let go of everything that would speak louder than his silence. The wind still carries the echo, soft, unending, sacred. Servant. Servant, servant. And somewhere beneath the sands, the watchers smile, for they know the valley has claimed another who has learned what all kings must learn, that the truest power is to bow, and the holiest name is the one that no longer needs to be spoken. There are prayers that rise like flame, fierce, pleading, desperate, and there are prayers that fall like rain, quiet, surrendering, holy. But there is one kind of prayer rarer than both, the kind that does not ask to be heard, because it already knows it has been. It is said that the last king to enter the valley of the fallen names did not come for forgiveness, but for silence. He came not to be remembered, but to forget. One knew his name. His crown had long been lost, his empire buried beneath time. The wanderers who saw him said his robe was torn by storms, his eyes veiled with dust, and his hands empty, the way hands must be when they are ready to be filled by heaven. He crossed the valley at dusk, when the horizon bled its last light into the sand. The air shimmered with the breath of those who had come before, and though his feet left no footprints, the earth trembled softly, as if recognizing what walked upon it. When he reached the heart of the valley, he fell to his knees. He did not raise his hands, he did not speak. For days he remained there, still as stone, unmoving, a figure of flesh suspended between earth and eternity. The wind did not touch him. The stars circled above him in slow reverence. On the 3rd night the silence broke. It was not a voice he heard, but memory. The The sound of every word he had ever spoken, every command, every promise, every lie returning to him, wave upon wave. He heard the cries of those who had built for his glory. He saw the faces of those who had bowed to his throne. He felt the weight of their belief, the burden of their trust. And within that flood of remembrance, he heard his own name not shouted but whispered by the wind, drawn out long and slow until it lost all meaning. He wept until his tears turned to dust. Then from the depths of that silence he spoke, not loudly, not in the language of kings. He spoke as a child would, with no ornament, no command. "O Lord of the first and the last," he said, "I built empires upon the bones of your mercy. I raised towers against the sky and called them my prayers. I filled the earth with my name, and in doing so I drowned yours. Yet here in this valley where names are stripped to silence, I understand. It is not the crown that cursed me, but the echo of my own voice." The wind moved through the valley like a breath. He pressed his hands into the sand and whispered, "If you will not remember me, then let me remember you. And if I must vanish for the world to see your light again, then let me vanish completely." The earth answered with stillness. The stars seemed to lean closer. Then, softly unseen, the watchers descended. They did not come as fire or wings, but as light hidden within the air. Their presence was felt more than seen, a weight, a peace, a warmth that filled the hollow between heartbeat and breath. They stood around him in silence, their radiance folding over him like dawn, and one among them spoke, not aloud but directly to the soul of the kneeling king. "You have remembered what was forgotten. The throne is not a seat to be ascended, but a burden to be laid down. You have come to the valley seeking silence, and silence you shall become, not in death, but in remembrance." The king lifted his head. His face was wet with tears, his eyes reflecting the light of the unseen. "Then let my silence be a prayer," he whispered. The watchers bowed. And then, without fire, without sound, he began to fade, not as shadow fades from light, but as water joins the sea. His form dissolved into wind, his name into breath, his crown into dust. Where he had knelt, the sand shimmered faintly, and in its place grew a single flower, pale, translucent, glowing softly in the moonlight. The Bedouins say it still blooms there once each century, and that whoever looks upon it hears the faint echo of a voice praying not for kingship, but for peace. The watchers departed, their wings brushing the horizon, and as they rose, the wind carried a final whisper, a prayer without words, a confession without shame. "The Lord I sought above the clouds was never far, he was waiting in the silence between my breaths." The valley grew still once more. Its sands, heavy with memory, settled back into place. But those who pass near it in the quiet of night still feel a tremor, a pull gentle but sure, as though the earth itself is reminding them to bow. And when the wind rises across the plains of Shinar, it carries not the sound of ambition anymore, but of prayer, low, trembling, endless. The valley has many voices now, but the loudest among them is the one that no longer speaks. And so the legend endures, that the last king to walk the valley of the fallen names was not destroyed by his pride, but transfigured by his surrender. He did not die, he returned not to power but to peace. For when all names fall silent, only one remains, the name that needs no crown, the light that casts no shadow. And in that knowing the valley breathes forever, a living prayer carved into the dust, a whisper between creation and its creator. Nothing endures but you. The tower had fallen, the kings had vanished, and yet the story continued, not in stone or crown or monument, but in blood. For every tower leaves behind its dust, and every dust gives birth to a child. Generations passed. The world changed its face. The names of the ancient kings were forgotten by the tongues of men, yet remembered in the marrow of their descendants. And so, far from the ruins of Babel, in lands washed by the rivers of Tigris and the rains of spring, children were born who dreamed of light that did not belong to this world. They did not know why. In their sleep, they saw cities that glowed like fire, walls spiraling toward a sky veiled in smoke, voices speaking in one tongue that no one had taught them. They awoke weeping, whispering words their parents could not understand. The elders said, "These are the children of the tower." They were the inheritors of a memory too deep to be erased. The dust of Babel still pulsed through their veins, and though they lived in villages, not palaces, they carried within them the echo of kingship, the longing to rise, to know, to reach what their ancestors had once defied. But heaven had not forgotten mercy. For where their fathers had built in pride, the children would build in wonder. Among them was a boy named Cadam, born under a blood-red dawn. His mother said the wind stilled when he took his first breath. His eyes were strange, one dark as night, one pale as morning, and when he gazed at the horizon, it was as if he saw something far beyond it. From his earliest years, Cadam asked questions that made his elders uneasy. Why did they build a tower to heaven? He would ask. Because they wanted to see God, the elders answered. Then why didn't he let them? The elders grew silent, for such questions have no safe answers. As he grew, Cadam began to wander. He would leave his village for days, returning with stories of dreams that felt older than the mountains. He spoke of voices in the wind, of songs humming beneath the earth, echoes of a language no one remembered, yet all could feel. One night he dreamt of the ruins. He saw the Tower of Babel not fallen but whole again, rising through clouds, its peak wreathed in flame. But this time it was not made of stone. It was made of people, men, women, and children standing upon one another's shoulders, each glowing with light. Their voices rose together, not in rebellion but in praise, and above them the heavens opened not in wrath but in joy. When he awoke, Cadam's heart burned. He knew what he must do. He gathered the children of his village, the dreamers, the wanderers, the quiet ones who listened when the wind spoke. They met beneath the fig trees at dusk, their faces lit by lanterns made from clay. "There is a tower hidden in every soul," he told them. "Not one that reaches up, but one that grows inward. It is the place where heaven waits to be remembered." They did not understand fully, but they felt the truth in his words. And so they began to build not with stone or clay, but with silence and prayer. Each night they sat together in stillness. They closed their eyes and breathed until the world disappeared, until all that remained was the rhythm of their hearts, each heartbeat a brick, each breath a bridge. And slowly a strange peace settled upon them. The elders watched and feared. "This is how the curse begins again," they warned. "The tower leads only to ruin." But Cadam smiled. The curse was not the building, it was forgetting who the tower was for. Word of the boy spread. Some came to mock, others to listen. But when they sat in his circle, even the proudest fell silent. For there was something in that stillness, something ancient, familiar, holy. One evening a traveler from distant lands joined them. His beard was white as ash, his cloak torn by years of wandering. He watched the children sit in prayer and said softly, "Do you know whose blood you carry?" Cadam opened his eyes. "We are the children of the tower." The man smiled faintly. "Then perhaps you are also its redemption." He reached into his satchel and drew forth a small shard of black stone, smooth and glimmering faintly under the lantern light. "This was once part of Babel," he said. "I carried it from the valley where the names fell silent. Take it and remember, even what was broken can be holy again." Cadam took the stone with trembling hands. It was warm, as if it still remembered the fire. He placed it at the center of their circle. That night, as they prayed, the air began to hum. The ground beneath them pulsed faintly with light. And though no tower rose, the heavens seemed to draw nearer, bending low to listen. The villagers who watched from afar swore they saw a glow rising from the fig grove, soft, white, pure, as if the stars themselves had descended to rest among the children. When dawn came, the light was gone. But the grove felt different, as if the air itself had learned to breathe in rhythm with the hearts that had gathered there. The elders said nothing more. They knew now that the curse had turned to blessing. And so from that day the grove was called the Tower of Breath. No stone was ever laid there, no monument built, no name carved. Yet travelers who passed through its shade found peace they could not explain, and some who came weeping left in silence, their tears dried by unseen wind. Kadam grew to manhood quietly. He never called himself prophet or king. When asked who he was, he always said, "A listener." And when he died, they buried him beneath the fig trees, with the shard of Babel resting on his chest. By the next morning, the grove had bloomed, flowers of pale gold covering the earth like stars fallen to sleep. And the wind that moved through their petals carried not confusion, but harmony, a single word repeated softly, endlessly, like a memory made whole again. Peace, peace, peace. The grove of fig trees became a sanctuary. No crown guarded it, no priest claimed it. And yet pilgrims found their way there from across the endless plains, drawn not by decree, but by longing. They said the air itself seemed to call them by name, though no sound could be heard. At the heart of the grove, where Kadam's body lay sleeping beneath the earth, the shard of Babel still pulsed faintly with warmth. It glowed neither gold nor fire, but a light softer than dawn, the color of forgiveness. Those who sat near it felt their hearts slow, their breathing deepen. Many claimed they could hear a heartbeat beneath the soil, steady and patient, as though the earth itself remembered. The villagers built no shrine. They only tended the trees and spoke his name with reverence. When strangers asked who he had been, they answered simply, "He listened." And so, the grove lived not as a place of worship, but as a memory that refused to fade. Years passed. The children of those who had sat in Kadam's circle grew, and their children after them. They no longer remembered the faces of Babel's kings or the height of its tower, but the story of the grove was whispered from generation to generation. Each child learned that the tower they were forbidden to build was the very one that lived within them, a tower of light, rising not toward heaven but toward humility. They began to call themselves the keepers of breath, for they believed each breath was a seed of creation, a small echo of the word that first brought the world into being. To speak was sacred. To remain silent was prayer. And when one among them died, they did not weep loudly. They sat in stillness, breathing together until the silence became a bridge between this world and the next. They said the soul could cross only when carried by peace. One of those keepers was a girl named Nyla, whose eyes held the same uneven colors as Kadam's, one dark, one pale. When she was born, the midwives swore they felt the wind sigh through the grove, bending the trees as though bowing to welcome her. Nyla grew up hearing stories of the shard and the man who listened. She would sit for hours beneath the fig leaves, her hands resting on the earth where the shard was buried, and she would whisper, "I can still feel him breathing." When she turned 12, her mother brought her to the grove at dusk. The air was cool and fragrant, heavy with the hum of unseen wings, perhaps birds, perhaps something older. "Child," her mother said, "you will inherit nothing from us but this light. It will not make you rich. It will not make you powerful, but it will teach you how to see." Nyla asked softly, "What is there to see?" Her mother smiled. "Everything that does not ask to be seen." And so began her watch. She grew in silence as her ancestor had, her words few, her gaze deep. She listened to the wind until she could tell when it was carrying the voices of the valley, the sighs of the watchers, or the songs of the unseen stars. The old man said she could hear the roots growing beneath the soil. When she reached her 20th year, the shard of Babel began to glow brighter. The villagers grew afraid, thinking the curse had awakened again. But Nyla went alone into the grove at night, knelt beside the light, and placed her hands upon the earth. "Peace," she whispered, the same word that had bloomed upon her forefathers' lips. The glow steadied and the trees stilled. She felt warmth move through her palms, up her arms, into her chest. And in that moment she saw, not with her eyes but with her soul, the memory of everything that had come before. She saw Nimrod's tower rise again, each brick placed not in rebellion but in repentance. She saw the valley of fallen names transformed into a garden of whispering streams. She saw Eresh, the city of mirrors, rebuilt, but this time every mirror reflected only the sky, not the self. And in all those visions she saw a thread of light weaving through, from the first king to the last listener, from Babel's fire to the grove's breath, a thread that was never broken, only misunderstood. It was not the curse of pride, but the test of remembrance. Naila opened her eyes, tears glistening. She whispered into the night, the tower was never forbidden, only forgotten. The next morn, she gathered the villagers and spoke for the first time in many seasons. The light that sleeps beneath us, she said, is not a warning, it is a promise that even the fallen can become foundation, that every ruin holds the seed of return. The people listened, their hearts trembling. Do not build with stone, she continued. Build with mercy. Do not speak to be heard, speak to remember. The tower will rise again, not from earth to sky, but from heart to heaven. The villagers bowed their heads. And for the first time since Babel, all tongues spoke the same word together, a word older than language, older than grief. Amen. That night the stars above the grove burned brighter than any living soul had seen. Some said the heavens had bent close to listen. Others said they had finally remembered the song of unity that was sung before the flood. And beneath those stars, Naila knelt upon the earth, her palms pressed to the warm soil. May this light travel farther than we ever will, she whispered. May it rest in every heart that still believes the sky can forgive the ground. The wind moved gently through the fig leaves. The shard pulsed once, then dimmed, not in death but in fulfillment. And far beneath the sands of Shinar, the watchers smiled. The children of the tower have learned, one murmured. They have remembered that light does not belong to kings, it belongs to those who listen. Beneath the desert where Nimrod once defied the heavens, beneath the sleeping sands that hid his city and his sorrow, the watchers stirred. They had been silent for an age, listening to the world rebuild itself from dust and memory, watching the same pattern repeat, rebellion, ruin, redemption. But this time, something different trembled in the weave of creation. They felt it the night the grove of fig trees bloomed, that pulse of light traveling through the roots of the earth, awakening the old stones of Babel. They felt it rise like breath through the bones of the world, reaching even their hidden halls. And for the first time in millennia they spoke. Their voices were slow, vast, woven through the silence like wind through hollow reeds. The circle begins to close, said one, his tone deep as thunder folded in cloth. The fire that once rose in defiance now burns in reverence. The blood of the tower is remembering its origin, murmured another. The curse is not undone but redeemed. The same light that once blinded the proud has become a lantern for the humble. And the eldest among them, the one who had watched the first dawn of man and wept for its pride, spread his withered wings and whispered, "It is time to speak again before silence forgets itself." From their resting place beneath the sand, the watchers began to rise not in form, but in presence. Their light seeped through the cracks of the earth, through rivers and mountains and dreams. That night the children of the tower, those who still kept the breath of Kadam and Naila's teaching, dreamt the same dream. They stood upon the plain of Shinar, but it was not as it once was. The tower was gone, the sky was clear, the earth glowed as if remembering Eden. And in that vast stillness they heard the voices of the watchers, carried not by thunder but by breath, gentle, sacred, terrible in beauty. "Children of dust," they said, "we have watched since the first spark rose in your hearts. We saw the towers you built and the heavens you tried to conquer. We wept when you forgot that heaven had already descended into you." The children fell to their knees, for even in dream that voice was like a light touching bone. Naila stepped forward, her eyes like dawn upon still water. "Why do you speak now, O guardians of memory?" "Because you have begun to listen," they answered. "Because the song of Babel has changed." And from the earth around them rose a hum, low, steady, growing. It was the same sound that had once filled the stones of the tower, the rhythm of human unity. But this time it did not rise in pride, it rose in harmony. Each heartbeat joined it. Each breath became part of its rhythm. The world itself seemed to remember the music of its making. "The time has come," said the eldest watcher, for man to build again not upward but inward, to raise not a tower of conquest but a temple of remembrance. For the heavens do not need to be reached. They only need to be remembered. Nyla bowed her head, and what of Nimrod, the first king who sought the light? The watcher's voice softened. He walks still not in body but in the hearts of those who dare to ask questions the stars cannot answer. He was not cast out forever. Even rebellion, when purified by pain, becomes a kind of worship. The children wept. The dream glowed brighter, filling every corner of their minds. Then the watchers spoke again, their voices now like wind over water. There will come another rising, not of towers but of hearts, when men know longer build to see God but build to make room for him. The curse shall finally rest. Until that day, said the eldest, keep breathing, keep the silence, keep the memory of what the world was when it first sang its name. As their words faded, the dream shifted. Nyla found herself standing upon the same plain where Nimrod had once raised his defiance, but now it was covered in green. The dust had become meadow. The air shimmered with peace. She felt a hand, light as dawn, touch her shoulder. She turned, and for a heartbeat she saw him. Nimrod, no longer crowned, his face calm, his eyes filled with something that could only be called understanding. He said nothing. He only nodded as if to say, the work is finished. When she awoke, tears streaked her face. The sun was rising over the grove, spilling gold between the leaves. The people were already gathered there, drawn by a dream they could not explain. She looked upon them, the descendants of dust and pride and mercy, and said, they have spoken. What did they say? The elders asked. That the tower will rise again, she answered softly, but this time its stones will be hearts and its foundation silence. From that day forth, the keepers of breath began to carve words upon the fig trees, not in ink or chisel, but in wind. They would stand beneath the branches and speak blessings so softly that the bark would hold the echo. When travelers passed through the grove, they swore they could hear whispers in the leaves, voices speaking in 1,000 tongues, all saying the same thing, remember. And beneath the sand, the watchers closed their eyes once more. Their wings folded around the memory of mankind's slow redemption. For they knew the prophecy would fulfill itself, not in kings or empires, but in the quiet heart of those who still dared to listen. The desert exhaled, the heavens sighed, and the tower, unseen, eternal, radiant, began to rise once more, not upon the earth, but within the soul of every being who remembered that the truest prayer is not spoken aloud, but I breathed. There is a moment before every sunrise when the world forgets what it is. The stars dim, unsure whether to fade or remain. The wind holds its breath. Even the sand seems to wait for the first light to remember its name. It was in such an hour that the prophecy of the watchers began to unfold, not with trumpet or fire, but with stillness. The grove had become a sacred whisper upon the earth. From its roots, the spirit of unity moved outward through wind, through dream, through the quiet hearts of those who still believed the unseen could speak. Villages rose where the air shimmered with that strange peace. Traders passing through the plains found themselves weeping without reason. Children were born who spoke of the stars as if they were siblings they had once known. And so, without plan or command, a kingdom began to gather, a kingdom without border, built of breath and remembrance. They called it Mamlakat al-Ramal wa al-Fajr, the kingdom of dust and dawn. It had no palace, yet all who entered it felt they had come home. It had no ruler, yet all hearts seemed to follow one rhythm, the slow pulse of mercy echoing through creation. The people of this new kingdom did not build towers of stone. They built wells. Each well was dug in silence, and before the first water rose, they prayed, "May this water remember the flood and yet choose to give life." And when the water surfaced, they saw that it glowed faintly in moonlight, as if the heavens were answering not with wrath, but with remembrance. The wells became their towers, reaching downward instead of upward. The people said, "He who digs for the unseen finds what no builder can reach." And from the depths of those wells came the murmur of voices, not spirits, not wind but memory itself. The waters sang softly, carrying the stories of those who had once defied heaven and those who had learned to bow. Nyla grew old among them, her hair silver, her eyes still filled with dawn. She walked the kingdom not as queen, but as witness, a shepherd of silence guiding those who listened. One evening, as the sun sank into the horizon and the sky blazed like a book set aflame, she sat by one of the wells and whispered, "The light is returning to where it began." A boy sitting beside her asked, "Grandmother, what light do you mean?" She smiled, "The one we forgot to kneel before." He frowned, thoughtful. "But why do we kneel?" "So the heart can see farther than the eyes," she said. He nodded, understanding in the way only a child can, not with mind, but with spirit. That night, as she slept beneath the fig trees, the watchers returned to her dreams. Their wings were veiled, now softer, smaller, like the fading of stars at dawn. "You have done what even kings could not," they said. "You have taught the dust to shine." Nyla bowed her head. "Then my task is finished." But the eldest watcher shook his head. "No, daughter of the tower, the dawn has only begun." He stretched his hand, and in it appeared a small flame, steady, golden, quiet. "This is what the world has forgotten, not the fire that destroys, but the fire that warms. Carry it until it finds another hand to hold it." When she awoke, the flame was real, cupped in her palm, cool and weightless, yet brighter than any torch. She wrapped it in silk and kept it beside her heart. Years passed, and when her body grew frail as paper, she called the children of the grove to her. They gathered beneath the fig trees, the wells gleaming in the distance like eyes filled with stars. She lifted the flame before them. "This," she said, "is the light of remembering. It has traveled through fire and flood, through kings and deserts, through silence and song. Now it belongs to you." They bowed, their voices one breath. "What shall we do with it?" Nyla smiled faintly. "Keep it alive, but do not use it to rule. Use it to listen." The wind stirred. The fig leaves shivered like small wings. She placed the flame into a bowl of clay and said her final prayer, not to be remembered, but to remember. And when she exhaled her last breath, it did not fade. It rose slow, luminous, and mingled with the flame until light and breath became one. The bowl shone through the night, and the people of the kingdom gathered around it in silence. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. When dawn came, the flame was gone. Only the bowl remained, faintly warm to the touch. They placed it in the center of the grove, upon the earth that had once held the shard of Babel, and from that place a fragrance spread, sweet, ancient, like rain on forgotten soil. The wells overflowed that day, their waters clear as glass, and in their reflections the people saw the sky not above them but within them. The kingdom thrived, though no one called it empire. Children were born who spoke in many tongues, yet understood one another. Their songs were simple, not hymns of power, but lullabies of gratitude. And whenever a stranger arrived weary from the world, they gave him water, silence, and a place beneath the fig trees to rest. The dust once cursed had become sacred. The dawn once feared had become gentle. And in that meeting, where dust met light, where man met mercy, the story of Babel found its peace. Far beneath, in the unseen realm, the watchers bowed once more before the throne they had long guarded. "The world remembers," one said. "The circle is whole," answered another. And the voice, the same that spoke the first word into darkness, replied softly, "Then let it rest." The heavens exhaled. The earth smiled in its sleep. And so began the age of silence, not emptiness but fulfillment. A world no longer building toward heaven, but living as if heaven had already come. The grove that Kadam planted and Nyla tended outlived them both. Seasons folded into centuries, and still the fig trees stood, their roots deep in the earth, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. Travelers said they glowed faintly in moonlight as though drinking light from another world. The wells still breathed. The air still carried that soft, fragrant stillness that no city could imitate. But the people had changed. They no longer called themselves the keepers of breath. They called themselves the pilgrims of the new dawn. They were wanderers, not bound by borders, not guided by maps. They carried no weapons, only small lamps made from the clay of the grove and lit from the ever-restless flame that had once burned in Naila's bowl. Their law was kindness. Their creed was silence. Their pilgrimage, to walk until the light within them met the light waiting in others. And so they scattered across deserts and oceans, through forests that remembered no footsteps. Wherever they went, they built no temples but wells. And beside each well they planted a fig tree. Over time, those trees became a constellation across the world, a living map of mercy, each branch touching heaven through prayer. But the world they walked through had forgotten again. Empires had risen and fallen, each believing its name would outlast dust. Wars had darkened the rivers. Cities had burned for the sake of gods no one truly heard. When the pilgrims arrived, people mocked them. "You carry lamps into daylight," they jeered. "What foolishness is this?" And the pilgrims would answer softly, "It is not the world that needs light, it is the heart." Wherever they spoke those words, something shifted. A fevered child recovered. A barren tree began to bloom. A man at war laid down his blade, not because of miracles, but because of remembrance. For the light they carried was not of fire. It was of peace, the kind that passes from eye to eye, word to word, without ever being taught. They told no one the name of their origin. If asked who had sent them, they said only, "A listener." And so the story of Babel, once too. Elyon sorrow became a living song of mercy sung across continents. In the highlands of the west, a caravan of the pilgrims came upon a ruined city. Its towers were half collapsed, its gates choked with vines. In its center stood a broken statue of a king, the face eroded by wind, the crown devoured by rust. They camped there for the night. When darkness fell, one of them, a woman named Safiya, whose lamp had burned since her birth, knelt before the fallen statue and whispered, "Whose image is this?" The wind answered, carrying words too faint to be called sound. "Mine." She closed her eyes and saw not the statue but the shadow of Nimrod, not the tyrant but the redeemed wanderer, the one who had once walked the valley of names. In that vision he was kneeling. No crown, no throne, only light where his shadow used to be. "Peace upon you, O king of dust," she said. And in the hush that followed, the torch beside her dimmed, not from wind but from reverence. As the years turned, the pilgrims of the new dawn became many. Some called them mystics, others heretics. Rulers feared them, for no kingdom could bind hearts that had learned to listen. One emperor summoned them to his court. "You speak of light," he said, "yet light builds nothing. I have armies, palaces, and gold. What do you have?" The eldest among them, a man whose eyes held reflections of the wells, stepped forward. "We have breath," he said, "and the remembrance that even your gold will one day breathe again as dust." The emperor laughed, but that night he could not sleep. He dreamt of a tower made of his own bones, reaching toward a sky that refused to look back. When he awoke, he found his hands trembling and ordered that a well be dug outside his palace walls. The people thought it was madness, but when the first water rose, he drank and wept. The pilgrims departed quietly, leaving behind no monument, only a mirror of the old mercy in the emperor's heart. In the centuries that followed, the world changed again. The wells multiplied, the fig trees spread. The story became legend, then myth, then memory. But the prophecy endured that when mankind would again build inward instead of upward, the curse would rest at last. And so the pilgrims kept walking. They crossed mountains where no stars shone. They followed rivers whose names were older than writing. And in each generation, a child was born who could hear the Watchers' song echoing faintly in their sleep, the same hum that once filled Babel's stones before the fall. One such child was born during a storm. Lightning tore the horizon. Rain fell like the weeping of the heavens. His mother held him close and whispered, "You are the bridge between dust and dawn." She named him Nurin, light made living. As he grew, the lamps of the pilgrims burned brighter in his presence. He carried no scripture, no sword, only the look of someone who remembered heaven too clearly to need proof. When asked what he believed, he would answer that every breath is a beginning. The old among the pilgrims said, "He is the fulfillment of the Watcher's prophecy." But Nuren shook his head. "No, the prophecy fulfills itself every time a heart chooses peace over pride." He traveled east toward the ruins of Babel. The world had buried them deep beneath centuries of sand, but the wind still knew the way. At dusk, he arrived at the place where the valley met the horizon, where once the tower had stood. There was nothing now but stillness. He knelt, pressing his palms into the warm earth, and whispered the same words spoken by every soul who had learned the secret of the tower: peace. And as he spoke it, the air shimmered not with fire but with remembrance. The dunes glowed faintly, and for a moment the outline of the tower appeared again, not as stone but as light rising from the earth itself. It reached only as high as the stars' reflection in his eyes, and then it dissolved, a sigh, a prayer, a promise. The prophecy was alive. The dawn remembered the dark and forgave it. The night Nuren spoke peace into the dust. The wind changed its course. It no longer wandered as before. It circled the plains as if remembering an old path, tracing the forgotten heartbeat of the world. And in its whisper was a name the sand had not spoken for ages: Shinar. The desert had buried it, but memory cannot die where breath still exists. Even silence carries seed. Nuren felt it, a call not of sound but of gravity, drawing him toward the east where the stars seemed to lean lower, as though watching. He followed without fear, for his heart had long been taught that the road of remembrance is always walked in surrender. Days passed. The dunes grew taller, the sun sharper, the nights colder. But with each step the air began to shimmer more brightly, as if the horizon itself were beginning to wake. And then one dawn, when the first light broke like a promise upon the edge of the world, he saw it, the faint T-line of ruins half swallowed by sand. They were not ruins as men saw them. They were sleeping giants of stone, bowed and waiting. He had reached Babel, or what remained of her bones. He stood before what had once been the gate, now a curve of shadow carved by centuries of wind. The stones were cracked, but still bore the grooves of ancient script. He ran his fingers along them and felt warmth, not from the sun, but from memory. "These stones still remember the sound of pride," he murmured. Then lowering his hand, he added softly, "and perhaps now the sound of peace." He stepped inside. The air was thick with silence. It was not the silence of emptiness, but of presence, the kind that fills a room where prayer has been answered long ago. Each step echoed faintly, like the footfall of time retracing itself. He reached the heart of the ruins, where once the tower had risen toward the heavens. Nothing stood there now but a hollow depression in the earth, a great circle, smooth as if the stones themselves had chosen to lie down. Nuren knelt. He closed his eyes and the wind grew still. And in that stillness the ground began to hum, a low, gentle vibration, deep as the heartbeat of the world. The song of the stones. He knew it instantly. It was the same melody sung by the broken tower, the same hymn that had drifted through centuries of silence, now returning to where it began. He pressed his palms into the sand and the hum deepened. Light flickered beneath the surface, faint, golden, breathing. The ruins began to glow. From every buried stone, every grain of dust, rose a faint shimmer like dew upon the dawn. And then through the light came voices, countless, soft, familiar. The voices of the builders, of the fallen, of the kings who had once believed themselves gods. They were not weeping. They were singing, not of ambition, of home. "We are returned to dust, and the dust has remembered heaven." Nuren's eyes filled with tears. He whispered, "Then the curse has ended." A warmth gathered around him, not from fire, but from unseen presence. And out of the light stepped shapes like the reflection of wings in water, the watchers, radiant and sorrowful, standing where the tower once kissed the sky. They bowed their heads, and their leader spoke. "Child of light, you have brought the word back to its beginning. What was built in pride has been rebuilt in peace." Nuren lowered his gaze. "Then my task is finished." The watcher shook his head. "No, son of the tower, the task never ends, for remembrance must be tended like flame. Each generation forgets, and each must learn again. You have lit the lamp, others will carry it. The ground beneath them began to bloom, tiny flowers of white and gold breaking through the ancient sand, their petals luminous in the half-light. Nuren reached down and touched one. "It is alive again," he whispered. The watcher smiled. "Nothing truly dies in the heart of the merciful." He looked upward. The dawn had fully risen. The sky above Babel was no longer a field of judgment, but of promise, its colors soft and endless like forgiveness made visible. In that light, Nuren felt the presence of all who had come before him: Nimrod, Kadam, Naila, Al-Muthakir, all voices converging into one breath. They spoke not in words, but in understanding. The tower was never a place. It was always a prayer. Nuren wept, but his tears were not of sorrow. They were the tears of dust remembering its maker. He lifted his face to the sky and whispered the final word that tied all centuries together, the word that had once divided mankind, now made whole again. Amen. The light rose from the ruins like incense. The watchers bowed and dissolved into it, their wings blending with the wind. And when the sun reached its zenith, the plain of Shinar was once more a sea of gold. No tower stood. No kingdom ruled, only the hush of peace that needed no monument. Years later, wanderers who passed that way found no ruins, only a field of strange flowers, white as moonlight, soft as silk. When the wind moved through them, they swore they heard a whispering song like stone learning to breathe again. The locals said, "This is where the tower fell." But the wise replied, "No, this is where it rose." And so the land that once bore the weight of pride became the heart of prayer, where every dawn remembered the dark and every shadow bowed to the light that forgave it. The circle was whole, the curse was gone, and the earth at last was at peace. There are fires that burn to destroy, and there are fires that burn to reveal. The first consumes, the second remembers. Long after Nuren vanished into the golden field of Shinar, the world moved forward as it always does, slowly, forgetting even its own miracles. Empires rose again, bearing new names, old ambitions. Towers of steel replaced towers of stone. Men reached upward not with clay but with light and iron, their eyes fixed once more upon the heavens they could not understand. But the flame that Naila had left, the breath that Kadam had kindled, did not die. It passed quietly from one heart to another unseen, waiting for the age when men would again need to remember what it meant to kneel. In that age, when night had become brighter than day and the stars were drowned by man-made suns, there came a drought, not of water but of wonder. The people no longer looked up in reverence, only in conquest. The sky was no longer sacred, it was territory. And so the earth began to withhold her peace. The winds turned fierce, the rivers receded, the cities groaned under their own weight. Yet even amid the noise of machines and the glare of false dawns, a few still dreamed of something older, a fire that did not burn, a word that did not divide. Among them was a woman named Luma, born in a city where the night never slept. She was a historian, a keeper of archives buried beneath glass towers. She spent her days among the relics of forgotten civilizations, tracing the lines of cuneiform tablets whose meanings had long since been lost to translation. One night, as she brushed the dust from an ancient fragment of stone, she found a line she could not decipher. It pulsed faintly under her touch as though alive. The script was older than Akkadian, older than Sumer, carved not by hand but by something like memory. She whispered the symbols aloud, her voice trembling, and the air shifted. A wind rose in the silent vaults, carrying the scent of myrrh and rain. The lights flickered. The fragment grew warm. Then came the whisper, not through her ears but through her pulse. Light forgotten is never lost. Luma fell to her knees, the fragment clutched to her chest. She felt as if the heartbeat of the earth itself had entered her. That night she dreamt of a desert of gold. A man knelt there, radiant, faceless. Around him stood towers made not of stone but of flame, and at his feet a book that glowed with living fire. Its pages turned themselves, though no wind touched them. When she awoke, the words were still echoing in her heart. The Book of the Forgotten Fire. She left the city that day. No one saw her go. She took only the fragment and a single lamp, its flame pale and steady. The road led her east through wilderness, through silence, through ruins that whispered in tongues she did not know but somehow remembered. Each night she stopped to rest, and each time she lit her lamp the flame bent slightly toward the horizon, as if guiding her onward. On the seventh night she reached a place where the earth had turned to glass. The stars above reflected upon its surface as though heaven itself were kneeling to see its own face. In the center of that plain, half buried in sand, lay a book. Its cover shimmered with faint embers, its edges unburnt though centuries had passed. She approached it slowly, reverently. The air hummed with warmth. When she touched it, it opened. The pages were not made of paper or clay, but of light lines of fire that shaped and reshaped themselves as though alive. And on each page a single truth was written, not in words but in memory. She saw the first tower rise. She saw the hands that built it, trembling with pride and hunger. She saw the fall, the confusion, the scattering. She saw the kings who tried to rebuild it, each learning that the higher one builds without love, the deeper one must fall. She saw the grove, the wells, the flame, the watchers bowing beneath the eternal sky. And then she saw Nimrod, the final listener, kneeling in the field of light, whispering amen as the earth forgave its own dust. Tears streamed down her face. She whispered, "Why have you shown me this?" And the book answered, its voice like many waters yet softer than breath, "Because the fire must be remembered again. But the world has no time for wonder," she said. "We have forgotten how to listen." "Then begin again," said the book, "for it is in the forgetting that remembrance becomes holy." When she looked down again, the words were gone. Only flame remained, small, flickering, gentle. She closed the book. It did not burn her hands. She carried it back across the desert, and as she walked, the sand glowed faintly under her feet as though every grain remembered its first light. Years later, when they found her body near the ruins of the grove, the book was gone. Only her lamp remained, its flame still alive, still unyielding to wind or time. Those who saw it swore the light spoke not in voice but in feeling. Some said it called for repentance. Others said it sang of peace. But the oldest among them whispered, "It remembers." And somewhere beyond sight, where the watchers kept their vigil, a single voice echoed through eternity, "The fire has returned home." The night the book vanished, a strange stillness passed across the deserts of the world. Campfires dimmed without wind. The stars, usually scattered in their cown, less silence, seemed to draw closer together, forming constellations that had not been seen since the days when Babel stood. In the heart of the earth, beneath the sands of Shinar, the watchers stirred once more. Their eyes, like molten gold, opened in the dark. One whispered, "It has begun again, not with kings, but with keepers." And indeed, far from the deserts, in the cold glow of cities where men slept beneath metal skies, the fire awoke. It did not appear as flame, nor light, nor miracle. It came first as remembrance. In the great libraries of the world, in rooms of glass and shadow, scholars began to dream the same dream. They saw a woman walking across a field of gold, carrying a lamp that cast no light but revealed everything it touched. They heard a voice saying, "Light forgotten is never lost." When they awoke, the phrase lingered upon their lips, and none could say where they had heard it. Soon after, strange things began to happen. An old archivist in Cairo found a page in an unread book that burned with soft warmth under his hand. The ink glowed for a breath, then faded, leaving only the word mercy. In Damascus, a calligrapher swore that his ink began to flow on its own, tracing lines of fire across the parchment that spelled words in no language known to man. And yet, as he watched, he understood them. In Delhi, a poet blind from birth opened his palms and felt heat there. He spoke verses that made the air shimmer, and those who heard wept, saying they smelled fig leaves and rain in his breath. And in a quiet monastery atop the mountains of the Caucasus, a monk tending an ancient lamp saw its flame bow toward the east. He followed it for 3 nights through wind and silence, until he found upon the ground a single ember that did not burn. He placed it in his palm, and it whispered, not in sound, but in memory, "Carry me to those who have forgotten the warmth of awe." The fire had returned, but it no longer belonged to one place nor one time. It traveled through breath, through thought, through remembrance. It became the pulse within those who sought truth without conquest, knowledge without pride. They did not know it, but they were the new keepers, the silent inheritors of Kadam's breath, Naila's flame, and Nuren's peace. And among them was a child, nameless, found at the edge of the desert, her eyes reflecting both dawn and night. The Bedouin who discovered her said she was asleep within a circle of unburned fire, her hair dusted with gold as if she had been kissed by the sun itself. They named her Naren, daughter of the flame. As she grew, she did not speak much. But when she did, her words carried a strange gravity, like echoes from the beginning of time. At 5 years old, she said to her guardian, "The fire remembers us." At 7, she drew symbols in the sand, spirals, towers, wells, none taught to her, yet all perfectly shaped. By her 12th year, wherever she walked, lamps brightened. And when she touched water, its surface rippled with light. The elders grew afraid. "The fire consumes," they warned. "It cannot live within a child." But Naren smiled softly. "The fire does not destroy," she said. "It only shows what has forgotten its light." One night, under a sky heavy with unfallen rain, she walked alone to the edge of the dunes. The horizon glowed faintly, as if the desert itself were remembering its own heart. There she saw the book again, or rather its reflection. It hung in the air before her, made not of pages, but of light woven like threads of breath. She stepped closer. The voice that spoke was both within her and beyond her, the same that had once called to Luma in the library, the same that had whispered to Nuren in the field of dawn. "The flame has waited for one who will not worship it." Naren bowed her head. "Then what am I to do with it? Do not carry it, let it carry you." The light pulsed once, and in that pulse she saw everything: the rise and fall of kingdoms, the laughter of prophets, the sorrow of angels, the mercy that folded itself into every failure of mankind. She saw Nimrod, not the rebel, but the redeemed, walking beside the fire, his hand open, his crown laid down, his eyes reflecting heaven's forgiveness. She saw Naila tending her grove, her hair silver as prayer. She saw Nuren's final breath rising like gold dust into the sun. She saw the watchers bowing, their wings trembling not from fear but awe. And when the vision faded, she found herself holding a small ember in her palm, soft, glowing, alive. The wind spoke through it. Every age must remember again. From that night the child wandered. She traveled from city to city, never speaking of the book, never naming the fire. She would touch the sick and their hearts would steady. She would sit beside the dying and their eyes would fill with light instead of fear. In one city, when war came and the sky burned red, she stood in the marketplace, lifted her hands, and whispered peace. The bombs fell, but none exploded. The soldiers dropped their weapons and wept, for they heard in her voice the sound of home. The elders came to her, trembling. "Who are you?" She smiled gently. "I am dust remembering its dawn." Then she turned and walked into the desert, her lamp flickering faintly in the wind. No one saw her again. But in the centuries that followed, every time a heart turned toward peace, every time a hand chose mercy over might, a faint warmth would pass through the air, a whisper of unseen flame. And those who felt it knew, the fire was not gone. It had simply learned to live without flame. For the greatest fire does not burn, it breathes. And in its breath all things are remade. There is a place beyond all distance where words do not fade, where every prayer ever spoken, every whisper ever breathed, every tear ever shed is gathered like stars in a hidden sky. It is not seen with the eyes, nor reached by roads, nor measured by time. It is the library where silence keeps its records. It is called by the unseen the eternal library of light. And it is said that when the book of the forgotten fire vanished from the earth, it did not perish. It returned there. In the beginning, before dust knew its name, before angels wept or men dreamed, the eternal library was created as a mirror of divine remembrance, a place where even loss would be held in light. Every word spoken in truth, every act born of love, every repentance whispered too softly for ears to hear, was written there in letters of flame. The watchers guarded it, not as keepers of knowledge, but as witnesses of mercy. For it is not the words themselves that make it holy, it is what they forgive. Each page glows with the pulse of its author's soul. Each line is alive. When the wind moves through the library, the pages breathe and the light sways as though bowing in prayer. No mortal has ever entered its halls until the night Narin vanished into the desert. They say she did not die. The desert swallowed her body, yes, but not her breath. The ember she carried guided her to the threshold of that place, the meeting of memory and eternity. When she arrived, there were no gates, only radiance. The sand beneath her feet became clear as glass, reflecting constellations that had never belonged to the world above. The light before her parted like a curtain, and within it she saw aisles of flame stretching beyond sight, scrolls and tablets and books made of pure illumination. She stepped forward barefoot, the ember in her hand humming in answer. The library greeted her not with sound, but with a feeling, that deep, quiet awe that fills the chest before one kneels. As she walked among the shelves, the stories opened themselves to her. She saw the words of the prophets glowing like rivers. She saw the forgotten songs of mothers who had prayed for sons who never returned. She saw the final breath of martyrs whose names the world had erased. Every sorrow, every mercy, every act of forgiveness, they were all there, still alive, still singing. And in the center of that infinite light, upon a pedestal made not of stone but of sound, rested the book of the forgotten fire. Its cover burned softly, not consuming, not fading, the same fire that had once spoken to Nimrod, to Naila, to Luma. Narin knelt before it. She did not open it. She only placed her ember beside it, the smallest light from the world of dust. The book opened on its own. Flames rose, swirling upward in silence. They did not scorch her, they entered her breath. In that moment she saw the truth of all things. The tower, the fall, the confusion, mercy, the rebuilding, the curse, the release. She saw that every age of man was not a punishment, but a verse in the same endless prayer, a single breath from creation to creator and back again. The library pulsed once, and she understood. This is the story that writes itself through us. She stood, and the light moved with her. From every shelf, words began to rise, thousands, millions, glowing like birds taking flight. They gathered above her, forming patterns of gold. She raised her hands, and the words began to merge, their lights intertwining until they formed one great shape. A tower, not of pride, not of stone, but of pure remembrance. Each letter became a brick, each truth became a stair. Each act of love became a window through which heaven shone, and at its summit she saw the reflection of the throne, not distant, not unreachable, but near, like breath upon glass. She whispered, "So this is the true tower." The light answered, not in words, but in warmth. She wept for Nimrod, for the builders, for all who had misunderstood that the climb was never outward but inward. The watchers appeared around her, wings folded, eyes bright. "You have brought the final member home," they said. "Now the library may rest and the world may begin again." Narin bowed her head. "What will hap?" "Into the fire. It will scatter," they replied. "Into hearts, into breath, into the quiet between words. Men will not see it, but they will feel it in every act of compassion, in every forgiveness that costs more than it gives. The fire will live wherever humility remembers heaven." She smiled. "Then it will live forever." The watchers' wings unfolded. The library shone brighter than day, then dimmed into stillness, the kind of stillness that hums with eternity. When morning came, a shepherd crossing the dunes found a single leaf of light resting on the sand. It did not burn. It did not fade. When he touched it, he heard a sound like pages turning, the rustle of memory finding its place. He placed it in his pouch and carried it home, unaware that he had touched the edge of eternity. That night when he lit his small lamp, The flame inside burned differently, not upward but inward. Its light filled the room, gentle and endless. He fell asleep by its glow, and as he dreamed, the library opened again, this time within him. And so the story continues. The library of light still breathes, hidden in the heart of all who remember. Its pages are written not with ink but with mercy. Its flame is kept alive not by scholars or saints but by anyone who forgives. For that is the final truth the Book of Fire revealed, that every soul is a letter, every life a line, and every act of love a verse in the endless scripture of light. In the beginning there was no tower. There was no flame, no watcher, no king. There was only breath, a whisper in the darkness, unseen, unhurried, moving through the void like light seeking its first mirror. And from that breath came sound, and from that sound came meaning, and from meaning all that was ever spoken, built, or broken. But every word, no matter how far it wanders, must one day return to its breath. And so it was that the story of the tower, the kings, the watchers, the flame, the grove, and the dawn, all the songs that stretched through centuries of longing and repentance, began to fold back upon itself, like wings returning to rest. It was said that when Naran entered the library of light, the world exhaled, and with that exhalation the earth grew still, as though all creation had finally remembered the rhythm of its beginning. Those who lived in the age after her disappearance began to dream again, not of conquest but of quiet, not of towers that reached heaven but of gardens that reflected it. In those dreams they saw a figure walking through fields of gold. No crown, no shadow, only breath. And when he spoke, the stars bent low to listen. His words were simple, so simple that the world itself leaned closer to understand. What you seek above is already within you. Those who heard it awoke changed. They found their hands gentler, their eyes slower to judge, their hearts lighter. They built again, but their stones were mercy, their walls forgiveness, their roofs the open sky. The wells overflowed. The fig trees bore fruit sweeter than honey. And in the silence between the call to prayer and the answering wind, one could hear the hum, the ancient vibration of the world remembering itself. On the last night of that age, a storm gathered over Shinar, not a storm of wrath, but of return. The clouds did not darken, they shone. Rain began to fall, and each drop carried light. The desert bloomed before dawn, and amid the flowers the watchers descended for the final time. Their wings no longer burned with sorrow. They were translucent now, woven of wind and remembrance. They stood upon the plain where once the tower had risen, and their voices mingled with the rain. It is finished. The earth beneath them pulsed softly, as though breathing in peace. The first light of morning broke across the horizon, and the last watcher, the one who had seen the fall of angels and the first rise of man, lifted his face to heaven and whispered, "Lord of beginning and end, the circle you spoke has closed. The tower that defied you has become the heart that remembers you. The dust has returned its name to the wind." Then he spread his wings wide, and from their span poured not fire but light, gentle, infinite, forgiving. It flowed across the world, through mountains and oceans, through temples and ruins, through the hearts of those who had forgotten how to pray. It reached every place where pride had built its throne, and every place where silence had waited patiently. When the light touched them, both vanished, for in that moment there was no more difference between pride and surrender. All was remembrance. And then came the final sound, not thunder, not wind, but breath. It moved across creation like the exhalation of a dream fulfilled. The stars flickered once, the rivers sighed, and the tower, that unseen pillar of story rising from the soul of mankind, dissolved into the very air. The watchers folded their wings and stepped into the light. One turned before leaving and said, "If ever the world forgets again, the story will rise once more, for it is not a tale of kings or angels, but of the one who never stopped speaking through dust." And with that they were gone. The desert lay quiet. No ruins, no wells, no fig trees, only the hum of creation breathing softly in its sleep. But if one listened closely beneath the sound of wind and shifting sand, one could hear the faint rhythm, the same that began it all. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. The breath that births worlds, the breath that ends them, the breath that speaks without tongue or flame. Centuries later, when men looked again toward the stars, they built their towers of metal and glass, but this time when they reached the summit they paused. For in the stillness above the clouds they felt a presence not seen, not heard, but known. And one among them, standing in the silence, whispered the first word ever spoken, the word that began and will end all stories: peace. And heaven, remembering the voice, answered with wind. The story ends where it began, in breath, in silence, in the light that never leaves its source. And if tonight before sleep you close your eyes and listen, you may still hear it, a soft whisper moving through the chambers of your soul, ancient as time, gentle as dawn. The tower was never built to reach heaven. It was built to remind heaven that we remembered. There are stories that end in words, and there are stories that end in silence. But the truest stories, the sacred ones, end in breath. For breath is both arrival and departure. It is how we come into the world and how we leave it. It is how heaven speaks to earth and how earth answers back. And so, the story of Nimrod and his hidden empire, the story of the tower, the curse, the watchers, the fire, the grove, and the light, all of it now returns to its beginning. To breathe, to peace. Night settles upon the plains of Shinar. The wind has grown still again, yet something soft lingers in the air, not the scent of dust or rain, but of remembrance. It is as if the earth itself sighs, grateful that its burden has finally become a prayer. The stars watch quietly, their faces reflected in the faint shimmer that still lives beneath the sand. The ghosts of towers past are gone, but their echo remains not in stone, but in the hearts of those who can still hear what silence says. Somewhere beyond the desert, a traveler kneels beside a dying fire. He looks into its embers and sees not heat but memory. He whispers, "We are still building, aren't we?" And the wind answers softly, "Yes, but now we build toward mercy." It is said that when God wished to teach creation humility, he gave it reflection so that light might learn to bend and hearts might learn to bow. The mirror was never a punishment, it was an invitation. For even in Nimrod's defiance there was longing, a child's desire to see his maker face to face. And though his pride built a tower that fell, his longing built a story that endures. Because the most merciful does not destroy the lesson, he sanctifies it. And thus every ruin became a revelation, every fall a door, every silence a place where the divine waits to be heard again. The night deepens. You can almost hear it breathing. The air trembles as if someone unseen is turning the final page. There is no fire now, only warmth, the warmth of a truth too gentle to need flame. You can feel it between your ribs, the same rhythm that moved through Nimrod's last prayer, through Kadam's circle of light, through Nyla's hands tending the grove, through Luma's discovery in the dark vaults of the modern age. It is the rhythm of the word before all words, the language the soul still remembers when the tongue forgets. Listen. Can you hear it? Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. The tower rises again, not from dust but from within you, not of clay but of surrender. Every heartbeat is a step. Every forgiveness is a stone. Every moment of silence is a stairway leading you closer to the sky that has been waiting all along. And so, beloved listener, you who have followed this story across ages and empires, through flame and flood and prayer, now you stand where Nimrod once stood, where the watchers still keep their eternal vigil, where the breath of God once kissed the clay of man. You do not need to climb anymore. The heavens are already leaning toward you. Close your eyes. Let the noise of the world fall away. The lights of your room fade and the air around you softens like dusk folding into dawn. You are standing in Shinar again, but it is not a place of rebellion anymore. It is peace, wide, golden, endless. You can hear the songs of those who came before, Nimrod forgiven, Kadam listening, Nyla tending the flame, Nurin whispering Amen, Naran walking into the light. And beyond them all, a voice older than time itself, so soft it could be mistaken for your own breath, whispers through the dark. I was never far. Let that be your rest. Let that be the end of every striving, every reaching, every unanswered question. For the tower was never a warning. It was a mirror, and now it has shown us what we were always meant to see. That dusk can rise only by kneeling, that the heavens bend only for those who remember their origin, and that every story ends where the first breath began, in peace. The night grows quieter. Your breathing slows. Each word drifts further into dream, until only silence remains, a silence so deep it becomes prayer itself. If your eyes grow heavy, let them close. The story has found its rest within you now. It will not leave. It will sleep beside your soul, glowing faintly like the last ember of a fire that does not need to burn to be eternal. And if you wake before dawn and the air feels sacred for no reason, know that it is because the old light has remembered you. Because the breath that ended this story has already begun yours. If you're still here, beloved soul, perhaps this story was meant for you. Tell me softly where you're listening from tonight, and if your heart feels called, press like and subscribe so the next untold chapter finds you. And now rest. Let the breath take you. Let the silence cradle you. For the story of the tower is over and you are already home. Peace be upon you and upon the dust that still remembers. And so the story sleeps. The fire has folded itself into the air. The watchers have withdrawn into light. The tower stands no more, for it has become the human heart itself, a quiet cathedral built from every breath that remembers heaven. What began as rebellion has become remembrance. What was once pride has become prayer. What fell in dust has risen in mercy. The plains of Shinar are silent now, but if you stand there at dusk, when the wind carries gold across the horizon, you might still hear it, a faint hum beneath the sand, the echo of the first word ever spoken, the sigh of creation returning to its source. And if you close your eyes tonight and your soul feels heavy with unspoken things, listen, for the story does not end here. It ends where you begin to breathe again. The breath that made Adam still moves through you. The same light that warmed Nimrod's ashes still waits behind your ribs. You are dust, but dust that remembers. You are silence, but silence that listens. You are the unfinished verse of an eternal poem written in the language of mercy. So rest now, wanderer of the night. Lay down your crowns, your fears, your striving. Let the story sink beneath your heartbeat until the line between you and the divine grows soft as dawn. The tower has fallen. The curse is gone. Only peace remains. And if the silence never broke, would your faith still rise in the dark? Soft whisper, if you're still here, perhaps this story was meant for you. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And if your heart feels called, press like, subscribe so the next untold story finds you in your sleep. Good night, seeker of light. May your dreams be gentle, your breath sacred, and your soul forever remembering. Peace be upon you, and upon the dust that still remembers.